More than 3 hours of One Piece theories. And it's probably because, if you've put on this video, it's obviously because you love One Piece and because you needed a background video to play while doing other things, like maybe you're going to sleep. If that's the case, good night. Or maybe you've put it on while eating. If so, enjoy your meal, or even if you're doing household chores, exercising, or anything else. Whatever your case may be, this video is perfect for you, and I would appreciate it if you leave in the comments what you are doing right now while you have the video playing in the background, because you know I'm very curious and I love knowing what you are doing while you listen to me. And in fact, every time I upload one of these videos, I get crazier comments saying that you are doing Stranger Things. But anyway, I'll leave you directly with the video of more than 3 hours of One Piece theories. Obviously, I want to say that this kind of video takes a lot of work, so I would really appreciate a big like, a subscription, and hitting the hype button. And now, I leave you directly with more than 3 hours of One Piece theories. The first thing to explain is that the world of One Piece seems to move in cycles and a predetermined destiny, something that Eiichiro Oda himself has hinted at many times in the series. In fact, the word destiny has appeared explicitly at completely key moments. An early example was when Luffy received his first bounty. Makino commented that Luffy was fulfilling his dream, and the mayor, Cubslap, wondered aloud if it was his dream or his destiny. This idea that Luffy's achievements might be predestined has been underlying since the very beginning of the story. It's no coincidence. Eiichiro Oda has left clues that in the world of One Piece, there is an inherited will that spans eras and certain events, almost as if it were the work of destiny. Another very revealing moment is the final speech of Whitebeard, Edward Newgate. Before dying, he tells Teach that he is not the one Roger was waiting for, hinting that there is someone designated to continue Roger's will. In that same statement, Whitebeard talks about how since ancient times there are those who inherit the will, and predicts that one day a person will come who will challenge the world and carry centuries of history on their shoulders. These words practically describe a kind of prophecy, suggesting that there is a destined path, a chosen one who will fulfill the task that even Roger could not complete in his time. Let's remember that Gall D. Roger himself, after finding Laugh Tale, commented laughing, "Joy Boy, I wish I had been born in your era. We arrived too soon." This confirms that Roger realized he had arrived too early to fulfill that destined mission, passing the task to someone from the future, most likely our Luffy. Even characters like Shanks have been involved in this notion of destiny. Shanks himself, speaking with a former member of Roger's pirates, Scopper Gaban, referred to himself as the destined child or the destined man, implying that Shanks had a very special role to fulfill. This is very interesting because it fits with the idea that Shanks has acted behind the scenes to guide certain events, like recovering the Hito Hito model Nika fruit, which ended up in Luffy's hands, something that might not be a coincidence. And in summary, One Piece has shown us that destiny and the inheritance of will are central themes, from the will of D to prophecies like that of Fishman Island, which Madame Shirley predicted that Luffy will destroy Fishman Island, an act linked to the dawn that everyone is waiting for. Everything indicates that there is a course of history that must occur. My personal interpretation of all these clues is that the story of One Piece operates in a kind of vicious circle, with events repeating throughout the ages in a very similar way. In other words, there are cyclical patterns. There always emerges an individual with the will of the type of Joy Boy who challenges the tyrannical world order and the world government, attempting to bring a new era of freedom. And there is always a final confrontation between these forces. This would have occurred not only 800 years ago in the Void Century with the original Joy Boy against the ancestors of Emu, but perhaps repeatedly since then. Possibly every few generations, an heir to that will emerges, a DI with the spirit of freedom who tries to overthrow the tyrant of the time, but so far has always failed, restarting the cycle again. That is why the world government has been ruling for 800 years without being overthrown. After each failed attempt, they erase from history the evidence of that uprising so that the world forgets and the status quo continues. A perfect example of these deliberate historical gaps is the God Valley incident. It happened only 38 years ago, and yet it was literally erased from the map and the books as if it never happened. If the government made an entire island disappear from the records because of what happened there, what might they have done over the centuries with similar events? To understand how Oda might have been telling the end of One Piece for a long time, we must look at two great wars we have already seen in the series. The Battle of God Valley, which happened 38 years ago in the story, and the War of Marineford, which in the present occurred just a couple of years ago in Luffy's timeline, that is, 2 years ago. At first glance, they are different conflicts, but you will see that they hold very surprising parallels, and Oda has created an intentional reflection between God Valley and Marineford. And this is crucial because the great final war that is approaching will follow this same pattern, but on a much larger scale. Let's look point by point at the similarities between God Valley and Marineford because they are the key to deciphering what the final war will be like. The trigger for the conflict will be a kidnapping. Both clashes began because the bad side, the government or the navy, captured someone, triggering the reaction of the good side, the pirates. In God Valley, as revealed in the latest chapters, the kidnapped person was none other than Shaki, who before being the bartender of Sabaody and Rayleigh's partner, turned out to be a legendary pirate in her youth, and was revealed to have been the Empress of Amazon Lily decades ago and the most coveted woman of her time. Her kidnapping shocked the world at that time and attracted the attention of the most powerful pirates. In Marineford, on the other hand, the kidnapped person who was sentenced to public execution was Portgas D. Ace, the son of Roger and a commander of Whitebeard. Both situations set the machinery of war in motion. In God Valley, Roger's crew went to rescue Shaki, and in Marineford, Whitebeard's fleet went to rescue Ace. Oda is telling us that something similar will happen in the final war. Someone important will be captured, their life in danger, and this will cause all the factions of the world to converge for the decisive confrontation. Then we have a young Marine with a conscience who questions the morality of the battle. In Marineford, we saw Koby, a rookie Marine protected by Garp, suffer a crisis of conscience in the middle of the massacre. He even stood in front of Akainu, willing to stop the war. Fed up with the senseless slaughter, well, in God Valley, there was apparently an equivalent role, none other than Monkey D. Dragon, yes, Luffy's father. He was there as a young Marine under Garp's command. Recent chapters confirmed a fan theory. Dragon served in the Navy in his youth. It is suspected that what he witnessed in God Valley, the cruelty of the world nobles, and perhaps the injustice of having to protect them, horrified him to the point of deserting. Dragon questioned everything the Marines represented that very day, which explains why years later he founded the Revolutionary Army. It is a very powerful parallel. Both Koby at Marineford and Dragon at God Valley represent justice within the Marines. Those who see the error of protecting evil, the Celestials or corrupt politicians, and they rebel. Perhaps in the final war, we will see that this archetype is no longer needed, because many Marines will awaken to the truth, or because the final conflict will be so clear, the true face of the government will be exposed, that there will be no doubt about what is right. In any case, it's interesting to note how Oda placed Dragon in God Valley in the same way he placed Koby in Marineford. Then we have the point that someone tries to prevent a certain pirate from going to war. In Marineford, Shanks intercepted Kaido before he reached the battlefield. Let's remember that Kaido, upon learning of the imminent war, wanted to take advantage of the chaos to attack Whitebeard, or simply cause a commotion. Shanks literally blocked his way, off-screen, obviously, and even with a duel against Kaido in between, he managed to reach Marineford in time to end the war. In God Valley, there was a similar incident. According to what has been revealed in the chapters, Captain Rock's D. Zebek had a confrontation with the Giant King Harold. And yes, until I get used to Rocks, I will keep calling him Rocks. I know his name is Davy D. Zebek, but it will be hard for me to change his name. It seems that Rocks was trying to recruit Harold for his cause, and Harold opposed him. A tremendous battle between Rocks and the Giant Harold. And this giant Harold was sent by the world government to intercept Rocks, making a clear parallel with Kaido and Shanks, where a very powerful pirate goes to war, and there is another who must stop him from going. Only that in the case of Harold and Rox, we know that it finally did happen. This role of preventing reinforcements could also be repeated in the final war. One possibility is that someone, perhaps an admiral like Fujitora, might try to prevent a certain secondary pirate group from joining the battle. I think, for example, of the Cross Guild of Buggy, Crocodile, and Mihawk. They might want to join the Chaos for their own agenda, and the Navy will send someone to stop them on the way. Can you imagine Fujitora intercepting Mihawk and company? It would be an interesting clash before the Great War, with Fujitora perhaps doing it by orders, but doubting deep down. It's just speculation, but it fits well in the pattern of God Valley, of Harold against Rox and Marineford, of Shanks against Kaido. Somehow there would be attempts to sabotage the meeting of certain contenders, although in the end, practically everyone would end up involved. Then we would have the sides of the war, and again, we can draw a certain parallel with God Valley. As for Roger's crew, it would obviously be the Straw Hats, who this time would be reinforced with none other than the great Mugiwara fleet to show that they are stronger, and also providing a strong argument to win, while still drawing a parallel with the person who obviously carries the same will that Luffy carries. Roger's pirates are a mirror, a parallel to the Straw Hats, meaning that the comparison between them is very evident and they will represent Roger's side in this final war. Then on the opposite side, in God Valley, we would have the Rox Pirates, the most feared crew at the time, making the God Valley incident even more dangerous and more famous among those who know about it. In Marineford, although the main villain was the Navy for executing Ace, we also had Marshal D. Teach, Blackbeard, in the mix. Yes, I will continue to call him Marshal D. Teach, even though his name is Davy D. Teach and his new crew bursting in at the end to take advantage of the chaos. In fact, Blackbeard arrived at Marineford with destructive intentions. He killed Whitebeard and stole his Gura Gura fruit and began to sink Marineford with earthquakes. He himself declared his intention to destroy the entire island using Whitebeard's power. This is a direct parallel with God Valley, as it is known that God Valley ended up destroyed and literally sunk beneath the waves after the battle. Marineford almost met the same fate at the hands of Teach, if not for Shanks arriving in time to stop the madness. Teach chose to retreat upon seeing Shanks. Logical. It's chilling to think that Oda was about to show us another God Valley in the present. Marineford would have disappeared from the map as well, sunk into the sea. If the war had continued a few more minutes, who knows what would have happened? Even Teach himself hinted at it with much sarcasm. This detail connects both events and makes it clear that Marineford was a modern and smaller scale reflection. From God Valley, then we have the legendary figures putting an end to the battle. At Marineford, Shanks, with his mere presence, declares the war over. If anyone still wants to fight, let them come against us. And neither side dared to prolong the conflict after Shanks' arrival. His weight as a Yonkou balanced the battle in that final moment. In God Valley, we know that the official victors were Garp and Roger together, but we also know that Figurlin Garland was involved, who was a holy knight present on the island. This is interesting because now we know that Shanks and Garling are directly connected. Shanks is Garling's son and was born in God Valley, being rescued as a baby by Roger. We could say that Shanks and Garling represent opposite sides of the same coin. Garling served the government in God Valley, and Shanks became a pirate. One initiated the massacre of God Valley, triggering the tournament on that island, and the other stopped the massacre at Marineford. It's a game of generational parallels. I wouldn't be surprised if in the final war Shanks plays a key role again, perhaps facing his father or his twin brother, Figureland Shamrock, which would drive us all crazy. Just imagine the scene, Shanks against Shamrock, twin brothers separated by fate, each on a different side. It would be the perfect rhyme to what happened decades ago with Garling and God Valley. Of course, with Oda, you never know. He might kill Shanks before that war to give us an emotional blow. We know Blackbeard has unfinished business with him. Even so, to date, Shanks has always appeared to balance the wars, and this dynamic could repeat itself. After reviewing all this, it is clear that Oda deliberately mirrored God Valley and Marineford. In fact, Marineford was called the War of the Strongest, a title very similar to how we might imagine God Valley was described in the annals of history. It is no coincidence. Oda was not only showing a great climax in the middle of the series, but also giving us a preview of the scale and structure of the final war. He himself hinted at it in interviews. He commented that the final saga will make the Marineford War look cute or small in comparison, and these statements probably sound familiar because at the time it was said that Marineford would look cute next to the war because of the Wano War. Well, this was a translation error that many people interpreted as they wanted, but Oda was referring all along to the final war. And indeed, something huge is coming. If Marineford was an appetizer, the final war will be the full banquet. We can infer that just as Marineford seemed small compared to God Valley in terms of danger, let's remember that practically all the legends were at God Valley. Roger, Garp, Rayleigh, a young Whitebeard, Big Mom, a young Kaido, Shaki, some Gorosei around, the God's Knights, even Dragon, Baby Shanks, Teach. The final war would eclipse Marineford because even more powerful people will gather in one place, with much higher stakes. Let's not forget that after Marineford, Luffy rang the Ox Bell and married Jawaz 16 times, symbolically marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. It was a prelude to the dawn that is about to come. The true fight for the Dawn, the one that will decide the fate of the world, is destined to occur soon in the story. And speaking of destiny, chapter 1159 of the manga is titled The Island of Destiny, alluding to God Valley. Oda practically hints that God Valley was an island where destiny brought together great names for a transcendental event. Think about the incredible coincidence, or predestined coincidence, that on this island, Roger and all his crew, Garp and Marine units, Rox and his pirates with future Yonko included, Young Dragon, Garling and all the Divine Knights, some Gorosei, Shanks and Shamrock as babies. Half of the powerful world was in one place. That doesn't happen every day. It seemed almost written by destiny. And now, in the final saga, we are seeing a similar convergence of certain characters towards certain places. In Egghead, there were already quite a few powerful people. In Elbaf too, and even Imu, the King in the Shadows, is aware of these cycles. In recent chapters, Imu ordered drastic measures against Elbaf, knowing that the next great war could be brewing there. In fact, Imu has personally gone to the front in Elbaf because he understands that the time for that confrontation has come. That is to say, Imu has lived through several repetitions over the centuries. Possibly he is immortal or of a long-lived race, or something that allows him to live a long time. And he recognized the signs that another war like the one at God Valley is approaching. Another destiny of Joy Boy against Imu, but this time, he senses it could be different. Just as Roger said, now the right moment might truly be arriving. Summarizing the lessons from God Valley and Marineford, we have a clear outline of how the final war will be in terms of its setup and the key pieces involved. Let's look at those elements one by one, and the candidates we have in the present for each role. Continuing with the parallel, the final war would start, as I said, with a kidnapping or capture that would shock the entire world and force all sides to act. Now then, who could be that captured person whose situation unleashes absolute chaos? This is a very difficult question, and I have thought a lot about it. For it to be the greatest war ever seen, the hostage must be someone whose fate matters to multiple factions, not just Luffy. Moreover, it must be such a serious event that even pirates who would not normally collaborate with each other or entire countries would mobilize. So let's evaluate some possibilities. The first, Monkey D. Luffy. If Luffy himself were captured by the world government, it would undoubtedly light a fuse. His allies and fleet would come, as well as his family, Dragon and Garp, but perhaps this situation might feel a bit anticlimactic. Luffy is usually the one who leads, not so much the one who needs rescuing, but as a call to the final war, it works very well in principle. But there's a small problem. Why, for example, would Teach's side show up if Luffy were imprisoned? We might think that Teach could go to eliminate him definitively, or to steal something from him, his devil fruit. But the truth is, it feels a bit strange, and I don't know how it would fit. Then, the character of Shanks could indeed go to protect his bet on the new era, Luffy, because he is his friend, but the character of Teach falls apart for me, and it's a very important side. Then we have the option of capturing Teach. His crew would obviously try to save him, but I doubt that heroes like Luffy would go to rescue Teach. Rather, at most, they might take the opportunity to fight him by force, but it's a bit strange. Besides, Teach would hardly let himself be captured alive at this point. It is more logical for him to be the instigator, not the victim. Another option is Boa Hancock, and many people thought of Boa as a parallel to Shaki. Both were empresses of Amazon Lily, and if Boa were captured by the Navy, let's remember that after the evolution of the Shichibukai, she was already in danger, and Teach even attacked her trying to steal her fruit. Luffy would surely go to rescue her. We already saw how important Boa is to him and his friend, and the debt he feels for her saving his crew. Teach might also be interested because he already tried to capture her once. He wanted the Mero Mero no Mi. However, Boa alone might not attract everyone. For example, would Shanks or the revolutionaries come just for Boa? Her capture would only matter to Luffy and Amazon Lily practically, maybe to Teach, but if he withdrew from Amazon Lily out of fear of Rayleigh, I don't see him being so obsessed as to get involved and risk everything in a great final war for her. Another option is Nico Robin. Robin is a constant target of the government. If the Gorosei or Emu managed to capture Robin, it would be very serious. She is the only one in principle who can read the Poneglyphs. Luffy would go to the ends of the earth to save Robin, as he already did in Enies Lobby. Dragon and the Revolutionary Army appreciate her. Dragon took her in for 2 years. He might have a huge interest in ensuring Robin does not fall into the hands of the world government. Teach might also need Robin to find Laugh Tale, I don't know. Even Shanks might understand the importance of protecting Robin for the sake of the truth of the Void Century. This is a quite strong possibility in terms of the storyline. One downside is that Oda already did an entire arc about saving Robin in Enies Lobby, and repeating it on a larger scale would be symmetrical, but perhaps repetitive, unless now the enemy is Imu or Teach, and the scale is global, of course. Other options are Sabo or Vivi. After the events at Mary Geoise, both Sabo and Vivi have been in danger. Sabo was falsely accused of killing Cobra and was almost captured, although he managed to escape from Mary Geoise with injuries. Vivi disappeared after the reverie, and we know that Imu showed special interest in her. If Imu captures Vivi, that would put Luffy, because of his promise to Cobra and his friendship with Vivi, into action. The revolutionaries too. Sabo and Vivi escaped together. Sabo might have protected her, and perhaps all of Alabasta clamoring for their princess. However, would Teach move for Vivi? Only if there were something to gain, maybe use her to blackmail for Pluton, since Pluton was related to Arabasta or something like that. Sabo in danger, on the other hand, would mobilize Dragon and the revolutionaries. Also Luffy, who is his brother, and even former comrades from the Revolutionary Army. Sabo was already the protagonist of the climax in Lulusia, survived an attack from Imu, and is very beloved by the public. A public execution of Sabo, the assassin of King Cobra, could be the government's move to discredit the revolutionaries and lure Dragon into a trap. Teach might try to steal Sabo's Mera Mera, but he already has enough fruits. Difficult. Another option is Monkey D. Dragon. This option resonates more and more in my mind. Dragon is the most wanted man in the world, leader of the Revolutionary Army. If the government or Teach manages to capture him, it would be the event of the century. Imagine the public execution of Dragon being announced in the plaza of Mary Geoise. In the style of Ace, Luffy would have a powerful personal reason to go. Although he hardly knows his father, it would be his chance to bridge that gap, and obviously he would want to save him because of blood ties and because he is Sabo's mentor, and Sabo and all the revolutionaries would do the impossible to free their leader. The whole world would be watching because Dragon is the symbol of rebellion against the government. His death would be a message of terror for the oppressed people, and his rescue a sign of hope. And Teach? Well, if my suspicions are correct, Teach could be the one orchestrating Dragon's capture. Something like this could happen. Dragon launches an assault on Mary Geoise, which might already be underway because we've seen someone attacking Mary Geoise. Imu and Teach might face off at some critical moment, two villains clashing over different interests, and Teach, with his cunning, could defeat Imu and even steal his fruit, for example, if Imu possesses a mythical fruit like Abyss or some power. And in the midst of that chaos, Teach could capture Dragon, bruised after the battle, and present his capture as a trophy to win over the rest of the government or to lure Luffy into his territory. I can even imagine Teach proposing a public execution of Dragon to show that he now holds the true power of the world government. That is, after having defeated Imu and taken the throne of the world, his introductory act would be having captured the most wanted man in the world, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, and demonstrating that with him, revolutions are over, that now he is the one in charge. It would be the perfect parallel. Teach assumes the role that the Navy had in Marineford, and Dragon assumes the role of Ace as the Condemned. Only this time, the Condemned is the greatest political enemy of the government. A moment like this would definitely make all roads lead to the final war, on that island of destiny, or wherever it may be. Surely it would be Mary Geoise, I suppose. Honestly, the capture of Dragon makes a lot of sense. He fulfills being someone of global importance. He personally connects with Luffy and Sabo, involves the revolutionaries, and therefore every oppressed country allied with them. And it could involve Teach if he positions himself as the new tyrant. Additionally, it would have a strong emotional weight with Luffy meeting his father in extreme circumstances, and also symbolic, the revolutionary leader being judged in the last Great War, a public execution like what happened with Roger that started the Great Pirate Era. Of course, obviously this is a theory, and Oda could surprise us with another victim or even multiple simultaneous captures. I don't rule out that they might capture more than one person. The government could set up a bizarre final coliseum with several sentenced individuals. For example, Dragon, Sabo, and Vivi. Imagine, the more bait, the more participants they would attract. In God Valley, there was a tournament perversely organized by the Tenryubito, where Shaki was the prize. The evil of the world nobles reached the point of auctioning human lives in a deadly game. For the final war, it wouldn't be surprising if Imu or whoever is in charge attempts a similar spectacle, a broadcasted public execution, a trap to gather all the enemies in one place. In any case, the outbreak would start with a calculated or prophesied incident involving rescuing someone crucial. Once this catalyst occurs, what sides will we see form in the great final war? If God Valley and Marineford teach us anything, it's that there will be three main factions: the heroes, the revolutionary allied pirates, the villains, the world government and their equivalents, and a third chaotic party, an ambitious pirate with their own style, a Rocks or Blackbeard style. But this time, the lines might cross a little due to unexpected alliances. Let's take a look. The Straw Hats and allies. Roger's heir. This side is clear. Luffy and his crew would be the modern equivalent of Roger and his, that is, the role of the Dawn. However, unlike Roger, Luffy would not go with just 10 members. Luffy has a large fleet of allies, those who swore loyalty to him in Dressrosa, numbering in the thousands. This great Mugiwara fleet will surely gather for the final battle, fulfilling the promise to come when Luffy needs them. This reflects how the pirates in God Valley were strong, but relatively few, while Luffy will have a considerably greater force, because this time the Inherited will must win, and for that, they need more firepower than in previous cycles. We would see characters like Cavendish, Bartolomeo, Shai, Hadrudin, and all the giants all fighting under Luffy's flag. Possibly allied kingdoms would also join, like Dressrosa, Arabasta, if Vili is involved, the Mink tribe, samurais from Wano. It would be a multicolored liberation army led by Luffy. At Marineford, Luffy arrived with a small, heterogeneous group: Ivankov, Inazuma, Jinbei, Crocodile, and even some enemies cooperating. In the final war, that idea will multiply. Former enemies could become allies of convenience. Perhaps we will see Crocodile and Mihawk from Cross Guild fight against the government side by side with Luffy. It is possible, since the Cross Guild hates the government and wants to overthrow its power system. It would echo how Garp and Roger set aside enmities in God Valley for a greater good. The world government and the Knights of God, the traditional villains. The great antagonist is Imu and his entourage, the Gorosei and the Holy Knights. Imu is the equivalent of the evil king who was behind the scenes in past eras. 800 years ago, he was the one who defeated the original Joy Boy. In God Valley, Imu was also present through the Holy Knights. Now, Imu faces the threat of the D again, specifically from Luffy, and is taking desperate measures such as destroying kingdoms like Lulusia, deploying weapons like the Mother Flame, or moving the Divine Knights to Elbaf. We can expect the world government to present in the final war its most terrible weapons: the Gorosei themselves, the God Knights led by Garling and Shamrock, perhaps armies of pacifists or Seraphim if they still control them. However, here comes a variable: Teach, because there is a very strong possibility that by the time the final war reaches its climax, the world government as such will no longer be commanded by Imu, but by Marshal D. Teach, and yes, again I know he is called Davy D. Teach, but I don't care. It sounds crazy, but let's take it step by step. Teach has been consolidating power. Right now, he is a Yonko. He has two OP fruits, the Yami Yami and the Gura Gura, and he always desires more. He has always had an air of a final antagonist against Luffy. He's another with the initial D, heir to the will of rocks in a certain sense. Many fans speculate that Teach could take advantage of the imminent chaos to usurp the throne. Let's imagine that in the first phase of the war, Luffy and allies manage to expose and weaken Imu, maybe destroy some weapon or something like that. Let's imagine, as I said before, that when Dragon and Imu are about to face off, Teach takes advantage, defeats both, finishes off Imu, and is the one to start that final war, this time leading the world government, claiming the power of the empty throne for himself. He could even steal Imu's ability if it comes from a fruit, and we've seen that Imu seems to use a power called Abyss or Shadow Control to possess certain bodies. Blackbeard would become the new world sovereign, and this would be a tremendous twist, but it would fit his character. He wants the world for himself. Let's remember that Rock's Deed Zebek, Teach's ideological mentor, aspired to be king of the world and challenge the celestial dragons. Let's remember that Rock stood before Imu and told him that besides being a fan of Davy Jones, he still couldn't harm him, but that he would return. Well, Teach inherited Zebek's will. Even his base is the former pirate island of Hachinosu, which belonged to Rocks. So Teach could succeed where Zebek failed, defeat Imu, and take his place. And there's a curious detail. One of Blackbeard's ships is called Saber of Zebek, and Blackbeard himself is obsessed with the dark history of the Void Century. He sought out Pudding to read the poneglyphs and knows things about the past. His fruit rarity seems very curious. If Teach takes control of the government or temporarily allies with them, many Marines might follow him. Think about Akainu. Would he obey Teach? Maybe not. Akainu hates pirates, but be careful because he is still a military man, and having overthrown the current head of the world government and placing himself at levels of power, he might simply consider it as a change of position and everything would remain the same. So, be very careful because even though Akainu is the way he is, this time Teach would stop being a pirate to become the governor of the world government. In any case, it is possible that we will see a unified band of villains that includes Blackbeard and his crew, plus what remains of the world government. A Blackbeard, perhaps with authority over, for example, the God Knights, would be terrifying, since remember that if, for whatever reason, he takes Imu's fruit and gains its power, he could have control over the God Knights. Can you imagine Teach commanding Garling, Shamrock, and company as if they were his new generals? It could happen if he defeats Imu and steals his fruit. As for Blackbeard's crew itself, it is already parallel to Rock's. Interestingly, many have noticed similarities. Katarina Devon, the Moonhunter, is a cruel pirate who could be compared to Big Mom physically. Avalo Pizarro also has traits that could be very similar to Kaido, a kind of mirror effect between the two crews, and of course Teach corresponds to Zebek. They are not exact equivalents, but the idea of this worst generation or allied pirates in a single group does somewhat repeat. Teach's side would be the modern incarnation of the Rocks pirates, creating monumental chaos in their wake. Then we would have the Navy divided, justice versus blind loyalty. Within the naval force, a fracture also awaits. Just as in God Valley, there were Marines following orders protecting the nobles, the typical government soldiers, and a Garp who acted on his own justice. In the final war, there would be Marines who switched sides upon seeing the truth. We have already seen seeds of this. Smoker questioned things in Arabasta. Fujitora rebelled against the policy of covering up the slave trade in Dressrosa. Aokiji directly deserted. The good faction of the Marines would probably be led by Kobe, who is presented as the heir to Garp's just spirit. In fact, there is Sword, the secret unit where Drake, Kabi, Helmeppo, etc. are, whose purpose seems to be to act outside the corruption of the government. In the final battle, I imagine Kobe and perhaps old heroes like Smoker, Tashigi, joining Luffy to overthrow the tyrant. It would be poetic. Kobe at Marineford asked for the end of the war and was almost killed for it. And in the final war, Kobe could directly turn his fist against those who perpetuate injustice, completing the cycle of revolution within the Navy. Cycle that Dragon started in God Valley. On the other hand, there would also be Marines loyal to the established power. Akainu would surely stand firm trying to crush pirates and revolutionaries alike, regardless of whether the boss is Imu or the Gorosei or Teach. Characters like Rob Lucci from CP0 would also fight on the dark side until the end, loyal to oppression. This internal tension could lead to Marines fighting against their own during the war. A possible example could be seeing an Akainu versus Sabo, as we saw an ideological clash during the setback. Then we would have the Revolutionary Army, which would be allied with Luffy. It is almost certain that the revolutionaries would fight side by side with the Straw Hats. In God Valley, there was not yet a revolutionary army as such, since Dragon left there with the seed of that idea. Now, after 20 years of activity, the revolutionaries are a global force. Dragon is captured or killed before the war. His commanders, Ivankov, Belovetti, Lindbergh, Morley, Karasa, would take action under Sabo's leadership. In fact, Sabo is already seen as the Emperor of Flames and an inspiring figure after the false news that he killed Cobra and declared war. The death or capture of Dragon would put Sabo in command of the revolutionaries in battle, along with characters like Konkawala. They would provide strategy and coordination among the allied peoples. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the revolutionaries unite the armies of various oppressed kingdoms to rise against the government during the confusion. For example, affiliated countries suffering celestial taxes could rebel simultaneously. Imagine Dressrosa Province, Sakura declaring independence in support of the revolutionary movement. The final war would have multiple fronts, not just on one island, but global protests and uprisings. But the main front would undoubtedly have them fighting alongside Luffy. A dream battle would be Sabo and Luffy together against some admiral. Let's remember that Sabo already fought against Fujitora in Dressrosa, Luffy with Kizaru, but we have never seen them fight together side by side, and seriously. If Dragon survives until the war, obviously he himself would lead his army, but he would be the #1 target of the villains. In any case, the Revolutionary Pirate Alliance would be the embodiment of the liberating army of this era. Other unexpected allies would be these, and here we have characters like Shanks, if he is still alive at this point, Buggy's Cross Guild, and even Luffy's old enemies. And Shanks personally has his own objectives, but he has protected the status in a certain way. He is supposed to have spoken with the Gorosei to warn them about something. However, with his father Garling and his brother Shamrock on the enemy side, it is very likely that Shanks will intervene against them. It may be that Shanks arrives with his entire crew, Beckman, Lucky Row, Yasopp, and perhaps his role is to stop some threat, maybe face Teach before the Great War and sacrifice himself. I hope not, but it's possible that Shanks might die at the hands of Teach before the final phase, giving Luffy an even more personal motivation to finish off Teach. If Shanks survives for the final war, I imagine a scenario with Shanks leading the vanguard alongside Luffy, or protecting Luffy from some dirty trick by Teach or Imu amidst the chaos. The long-awaited Shanks versus Blackbeard could happen, finally unleashing their rivalry. Teach already gave Shanks the scar some time ago. Or, as I mentioned before, Shanks versus his brother Shamrock in a battle for the soul of the Figureland family. As for the Cross Guild, it deserves a mention, as Buggy made it clear that he dreams of finding the One Piece, even rallying Mihawk and Crocodile to rival Luffy, Shanks, and Teach. And he might see the final war as his chance to mistakenly proclaim himself a hero, or savior, or something like that. Mihawk in particular has loyalty only to himself. However, he hates the government since they pursued him after taking away his title of Shichibukai, and he is a friend, or at least respects Shanks. Crocodile holds a grudge against the government, was imprisoned, and also has an ambition for power, so it is not far-fetched that the Cross Guild might end up tactically allied with Luffy to overthrow the government and then perhaps fight over the spoils. It would be hilarious to see a Buggy pretending to lead an allied army in the middle of a war, with his banner offering bounties for marine heads. Also, if Admiral Fujitora appears, he could interact with the Cross Guild, since Izo is against the corrupt system. Maybe Fujitora pretends to fight them, but ends up joining their cause. Many strange alliances can arise in the final battle. As the common enemy, it will be imposing. Then we have the Giants of Elbaf, and there is a very important factor. Since Whole Cake, we were told that whoever has the Giants on their side will dominate the seas. The world government has been trying for centuries to enlist giants in their ranks. Vegapunk himself researched gigantification by their order. Imu himself apparently believes that having the giants on his side is key to winning the Great War. Currently, Luffy has good relations with Elbaf through Dory and Brogy, the giants from Little Garden who reappeared in Egghead, and also Shanks' alliance with the new generation of giants. It is expected that Elbaf will side with Luffy, as the giants value honor, friendship, and their relationship with the D. We have Jaguar D, Saul, who is also an Elbaf. There is an important detail in the recent chapters, and it is that Imu launched a devastating attack on Elbaf and directly confronted the giant warriors and even Scopper Gaba, who was there. This suggests that Elbaf could suffer significant casualties before the final war, perhaps to weaken its impact on the battle. Even so, surely the most important survivors could lead the giants to join Luffy. Imagine rows of giant warriors charging against the pacifists or against government ships. It would be spectacular. The giants can tip the balance. Perhaps they face some massive government weapon, for example, stopping an ancient giant on the opposing side or knocking down walls. Without a doubt, their presence would fulfill the prophecy. With giants on his side, Luffy would have a huge advantage. Then we have the ancient weapons, Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, the most destructive trump cards in the world, and it makes sense to think they would have a role. Poseidon is Shirahoshi, the mermaid princess capable of commanding the giant sea kings. Pluton is a warship located beneath Wano, and Uranus is theorized to be the same weapon that Imu used to erase Lelouchia from the map. In the final war, we could very well see these weapons come into play. However, I have a hunch that their use will be early or limited. If one of the sides were to use the full potential of an ancestral weapon at full force, 100%, the battle would be short or unbalanced. For example, Poseidon could submerge entire fleets with an army of sea kings. Pluton could obliterate an island with a single cannon shot. And Uranus, let's not even mention it. We already saw what it did to Lelouchia, so to maintain the tension of individual fights and the epic nature of the characters, Oda might make these weapons cancel each other out or be destroyed before the decisive moment. We could have something like Blackbeard, who manages to seize Pluto, stealing it in Wano through someone telling him it's there. Let's remember that Caribou heard about Pluton and mentioned someone he had to inform, and now he's with Teach. With this Pluton, Teach would have a weapon capable of devastating islands, just his style. On the other hand, Luffy would have Poseidon or Shirahoshi as an ally. I imagine a scenario where before the start of the Great War, we have a Pluton versus Poseidon, and they engage in a kind of titanic duel. Teach could attack Sabaody or some area with Pluton, and Shirahoshi would summon the Sea Kings to stop him. In this fight, it is possible that both weapons will be neutralized, the ship in pieces, perhaps Shirahoshi injured or unable to call more creatures momentarily. That way, when the war on land is at its peak, neither could resort to a cannon shot that wipes everyone out in one go, or the Sea Kings themselves. The fight must be decided the old-fashioned way. Hockey against hockey, fists, swords, and Akuma no Mi. Uranus, on the other hand, could be used by Imu or Teach for an initial devastating act, maybe destroying part of Elba or some rebel base or something like that. But be careful, because Vegapunk's consciousness is still out there and they might find a way to sabotage or neutralize it. There is also the possibility that Franky fulfills Thomson's dream by using the Pluton blueprints he memorized to build something that counters the original Pluton or Uranus. It would be great to see the Sunny modified with ancient technology. In any case, the ancient weapons will appear, yes, but Oda will be careful that they don't potentially steal all the spotlight from the heroes. They will rather be elements to add drama, for example. A shot from Pluton destroying something beloved that further motivates Luffy, or to force the alliance of factions, everyone against the weapon before continuing to fight each other. With all these players on the board, the final war of One Piece promises to be a monumental chaos, the climax of all the themes of the series. Freedom against oppression, inherited will versus fear, friendship versus hatred, destiny versus free will. Each key piece seems to be already placed or anticipated by Oda, as I have tried to explain. It is no coincidence that so many current elements repeat patterns of past events. Oda has been building this cyclical parallelism for a long time, so that when we are in the middle of the final war, fans can recognize and say, oh look, this is like Marineford but on a grander scale. Oh look, what's happening is what we couldn't fully see in God Valley. It would be a great rhyme of history. During this final war, we might see certain surprises or interesting details, and the truth of the Void Century, for example, could be revealed to the world. More than a surprise, it is a goal. Robin and the knowledge of the poneglyphs will surely come to light. Perhaps in the middle of the final battle, Imu or Teach might try to suppress the truth, and it will be crucial to protect Robin so she can spread it. I imagine a scene of Robin reading the Rio poneglyph and using a Denden Mushi to broadcast the message to the whole world and convey the true story of Joy Boy and the ancient kingdom under the government's tyranny. This would demoralize many Marines and ignite the revolutionary spark on every island. This could be the moral blow that collapses the regime, complementing Luffy's physical victory over Imu or Teach. Then we would have the D. And destiny. Surely we will finally know what the will of D means, the one shared by Luffy, Teach, Garp, Roger, Rox, etc. Many interpret it as dawn or destiny, which we have mentioned before, and it's that Whitebeard, upon dying, said, the legacy of the D will continue to wage war. It may be that we basically discover a formal prophecy about Joy Boy or Toki leaving a message about the year in which the Great War would occur. Let's remember that Toki jumped to the future and died predicting the arrival of the new dawn 20 years later. All these threads would come together. I wouldn't be surprised if Luffy, at some crucial moment, is literally the embodiment of destiny. For example, that the ancient spirits of Willbearers, Roger Joy Boy, symbolically manifest behind him in the final fight. Something like saying, we are with you. Or maybe it's too much of a shonen cliche, but come on, Oda loves mythological drama. Then we have the sacrifice of a symbol. It could even be someone like the red-haired one. It could be anyone, but we might have someone who, for example, dies protecting Luffy from an attack by Teach, explaining the sacrifice of Ace at Marineford. But this time, as I say, with Shanks or Garp giving their life to stop even Akainu or Teach and save their grandson this time. Any of those deaths would further ignite Luffy's determination at the climax. Oda usually hits hard in those acts. He already did it with Ace, Yasuya, and Wano, so we can prepare for possible tears before victory. In short, the keys to the final war are already planted in the story. God Valley and Marineford gave us the structure, beginning with a kidnapping, defined sides, internal betrayals in the villain's side. Let's remember that Ochaku betrayed Rox by selling out Shaki. Squardo briefly betrayed Whitebeard by deceiving Akainu, surprising appearances that decide the course, Garp who suddenly appeared in God Valley, Shanks who appeared to stop the war, and an outcome that marks the entire change of the era. The final war will take all that and push it to the extreme. Oda has been playing with the concept of destiny in a very subtle way, so that in the end everything makes an impressive sense. When we see the Great War unfold, many will say this was already hinted at 500 chapters ago. It will be like fitting the last piece of a puzzle that is right in front of us. In conclusion, the theory of a cyclical destiny in One Piece, where events from the past are reflected in the future, is more relevant than ever. It's not that the story repeats exactly, but that there is a kind of cosmic script in the world, and it's the will of D. Always finds a bearer, darkness always has a face, and very soon Teach, and that the clash between them is inevitable until the cycle of oppression is broken. Oda has been preparing us for that decisive moment using historical parallels, God Valley against Marineford, and references to destiny in the words of characters. We know that this time is different. Joy Boy has returned. The table is set with all the pieces. The Poseidon weapon awakens, allies of all kinds, Imu revealed, and even the enemy senses it. The last great war will be the climax where that destiny is finally fulfilled or broken. Personally, it excites me to think about how Oda could surprise us even knowing this general framework, because if there is something that characterizes One Piece, it is that, even though we know where we are going, Luffy will face the final villain and seek the One Piece, and how we get there always exceeds our expectations in creativity and excitement. Perhaps the final war will bring unexpected twists, like the appearance of the original Joy Boy in a flashback that inspires everyone in the present, or the liberation of thousands of slaves from Mary Geoise joining the revolt. Anything is possible. In any case, it is clear that Eiichiro Oda has woven his story like a great circle. Ancient events shape future events, and the concept of destiny gives the saga an aura almost of epic legend. We are approaching the moment when that destiny will fully manifest in the narrative, and if the clues do not deceive us, the final war of One Piece will be an event so colossal and so full of moments parallel to God Valley, it will blow our minds. As Oda said, Marineford will seem like just a tale or something cute compared to what's coming. Buckle up and enjoy the journey towards the dawn, because we are about to witness the culmination of this era of pirates, where, now indeed, the fate of the entire world will be decided, and this time, Luffy and his allies will manage to break the cycle. The vicious circle from 800 years ago will finally close, giving way to a new beginning full of freedom, the dawn that so many have awaited. In the recent chapters of One Piece, a terrifying power of the mysterious Imu was revealed, the technique known as Domi Reversi. This ability allows turning people into demons, colossal and violent beings under their control. At first glance, the Domi Reversi seems invincible. Imu literally flips the will of his victims to bring them to his side, creating enemies out of nowhere. However, the details surrounding this technique have given rise to an interesting theory. As I said, this technique has generated a lot of discussion in the community. People saying it's very broken, people saying it's not that big of a deal, and it hasn't left anyone indifferent. For that reason, let's analyze what's going on with this. To understand the possible weakness of the Domi Reversi, first, we'll review what this technique consists of. Imu, the enigmatic figure who rules from the shadows of the world government, demonstrated the ability to transform people into demons through a process that is almost a ritual. As observed, Imu creates a strange dark abyss in the air beneath the target, causing the victim to sink and then be physically turned upside down. Upon emerging from this dark circle of Imu, the person comes out with a new demonic identity. This transformation grants a much more powerful body and even a certain immortality as they regenerate any wounds suffered after the change. This comes at the cost of the individual's own will. Imu imposes this conversion even if the victim does not voluntarily accept it. That is, it does not require the affected person's consent to demonize them. But the most unsettling part is that the Domi Reversi spreads like a domino effect on the battlefield. If a person is turned into a demon, anyone caught in a sort of straight line between two transformed individuals will also be automatically transformed into a demon. We saw this in Elbaf when Dory and Brogy are turned into demons, and all the other giants aligned with them also trigger the Domi Reversi from one to another. This is something that has certainly gone unnoticed, as I have seen many people say it requires direct contact. It does not seem to be the case, since as I said, the rest of the demons were not initially touched. Perhaps it requires an initial contact and then the others follow in series. I do not know, but in other words, Imu can transform an entire group by flanking their targets. He converts two victims and everyone who is between them fall under the spell. All this without Imu having to target them one by one. This mechanic immediately reminds us of something. Indeed, the name of the Domi Reversi is not coincidental. Eiichiro Oda made a direct reference here to the classic board game, Reversi or Othello. In Reversi, two players place black or white pieces on a board. Each time they enclose the opponent's pieces between two of their own, all the enemy pieces trapped in the middle are flipped and changed to your color. Imu's Domi Reversi operates under the same flipping logic. Imu places two demons, and the people caught between them are forcibly switched sides, also becoming demon servants of Imu. This visual reference was even shown in the manga during the activation of the technique, and we saw interspersed panels of a Reversi board highlighting the parallel. Oda was giving us a hint of how it works. Emu is literally flipping people, just like in the game where you flip the pieces. It's a perverse game where Emu seeks to surround and reverse the loyalty of his enemies. Here, I'm going to take the opportunity to comment on a small theory about what could be the nerf, in quotes, the limitation of this technique, but it won't be the big solution that this video points to. The only thing I want to comment on is so you can see that there are certain interesting ideas, and this could be one of them. Beyond the reference to the game, the very name Domi Reversi hides a key meaning. It comes from Latin, and literally Domi Reversi means returned home, or those who returned home. This translation is extremely revealing. Why return home? At first glance, it doesn't make sense. What does home have to do with turning someone into an obedient demon? The answer might lie in the necessary condition for Emu to impose this curse. This is where the theory of the origin curse is born. It is proposed that Emu can only exercise the Domi Reversi on individuals who are in their homeland, in their place of origin. In other words, returning home would be the requirement to be the victim of this malevolent reversi. We can break down the Latin term to understand it better. Domi means at home or in the home, and reversi means returned or turned. The idea of turning at home or returning home fits surprisingly well with what we have seen in the plot. It seems to suggest that the spell brings back something latent within the person when they are in their land, perhaps their metaphorical inner demon, and brings it to the surface, turning their nature. That's why we could also interpret it as reversing the home or reversing loyalty, meaning changing what the person considers their allegiance or safe place. Put simply, Emu turns the victim's sense of home or homeland into a weak point, using that bond to dominate them. But the idea of the curse of origin doesn't come from nowhere. It is supported by all the known cases of Domi Reversi we have seen so far. Every victim we have seen fall to this technique was at home at the time of their transformation. Let's review these cases. Emu used the Domi Reversi on the legendary giants Dori and Brogi, along with other giant warriors from the island. It is important to highlight that Elbaf is the homeland of the giants. Dori and Brogi, whom we met in Little Garden, had finally returned to their ancestral home in Elbaf only to be turned into demons. All the giants affected on this occasion were natives of Elbaf, and no outsiders present were transformed. This last point is crucial, as so far all the people we have seen in Elbaf who have been converted were natives, meaning Emu turned the defenders of their own land against their people. Then we have the Davy family and Rox D. Zebek in God Valley. We saw how Rox D. Zebek and the Davy family were turned into demons during the Battle of God Valley. And where did this happen? Well, as I said, in God Valley. Here are interesting nuances, and this is totally key as the people we have seen affected by the Domi Reversi are all from the Davy clan family, and Rox said he was from that land, that it was his homeland. A fact that is very important and, as I say, perfectly accompanies what happened in Elbaf. These known examples fit the hypothesis. Domi Reversi does not transform just anyone, but only those who are in their homeland. It does not seem like a coincidence, but rather a kind of deliberate pattern. Oda would have left us a very clear trail. The name of the technique and the circumstances of its use point to the same hidden condition. So, with the above on the table, we can clearly formulate the theory. Emu needs their target to be in their place of origin to flip them with their Domi Reversi. This would be one of Emu's great weaknesses, their Achilles heel, hidden within an otherwise overwhelming power. It's not that Emu has openly revealed it, but the clues do suggest it. If the Domi Reversi only works in the target's homeland, then Emu cannot just arrive and cannot turn anyone anywhere. He must be very selective with the battlefield. This is a great relief for our protagonists. It means that as long as they keep the fight away from their home island, they will have protection from this spell. On the contrary, if any character ends up fighting in their own town or kingdom, they will be in danger of falling under Emu's control. The reason for returning home. Why would Emu need them to be at home? One possible explanation is almost mystical. Perhaps each person has a special connection with their homeland, a root or energy linked to their origins. And Emu takes advantage of this bond to twist their soul. We could call it a curse of origin because it traps the person in the place where they were born, and there their spirit is more vulnerable to being subdued. Perhaps far from home, one is out of reach for this magic, but upon stepping on your land, you fall under Emu's circle of influence if he decides to exploit it. From Emu's point of view, this explains some tactical decisions. For example, why did Emu attack Elbaf directly? Precisely because Elbaf is the home of the giants. There he could turn the most powerful warriors of that race into his puppets with the Domi Reversi, and if the giants had been away, at sea, or in another country, perhaps it wouldn't have worked. The same in God Valley. It is possible that Emu chose that place or that moment because he knew that certain key people were on his turf. Emu might even be manipulating confrontation scenarios so that enemies end up fighting in their own domains, making them vulnerable to the curse. Too much power. Upon hearing this one might think, wow, this really nerfs Emu a lot, right? Because if none of our protagonists are in their homeland during the final battle, Emu couldn't turn them into demons, period. Exactly. This condition acts as a kind of balance. Oda usually gives some limit to very broken fruits or powers, and this would be the logical limit of the Domi Reversi. It is powerful, but situational. For the Straw Hats, for example, most come from other islands, from the East Blue or other seas. As long as the war is waged in Mary Jawaz, in Laugh Tale, or anywhere that is not their hometown, they would be safe from this spell. Now, if suddenly Luffy had to fight in Fushia Village where he was born, or Zoro in Shimotsuki Village, watch out. But it is unlikely that the final battle will occur in those places. The dangers for certain characters. Not all allies can claim victory. Let's think about characters whose origins we know and who might end up fighting there. For example, if at some point a battle takes place in Arabasta and Vivi is there, could Emu convert her since she is in her native kingdom? It's possible. Or Sabo in the kingdom of Goa, in his land, or even Dragon if his base turned out to be his place of origin. Speculation aside, those who are indeed at home during the final saga clearly run a risk. An immediate case, the Giants of Elbaf have already experienced it firsthand. Also, what about the Samurai of Wano if Emu comes to attack Wano? Every rebellious country runs this risk. This is the first part of the video, which is a theory I found that has become very popular, and I must say there are quite a few arguments. I mean, it's quite a coincidence that this technique has only been used in these cases of people who are present in their birthplace. Precisely. On top of that, it fits with the name. It is true that I find it a bit strange that Emu knows, for example, that Xebec was native to God Valley. I don't know if there is certain information that might be revealed later in the manga, but as of today, I find it a bit strange. And this, as I say, I mention as a theory because I have seen it become very popular, especially in the Brazilian, French, and English communities, and I wanted to bring it to the Spanish community as a sort of first nerf. But let's go to the other nerf, because of course this simply implies that there are characters who cannot be turned with the Domi Reversi, and obviously that's a great relief. But of course, naturally, wherever you fight, there will always be people who were born there, because people usually stay where they have lived. So this ability, wherever it is a very big danger. As I said, it gives you a lot of strength and regeneration. So let's go directly to the main part of the video. If we accept that the Domi Reversi has this limit, the narrative implications for the climax of One Piece are enormous. Essentially, Emu could simply snap his fingers and turn the entire revolutionary army or all the pirates in the world into his puppets, unless he catches them in their respective homes. This adds a very interesting strategic game to the final war. The Allied side must ensure to choose the battlefield carefully. The ideal for the Allied side in the battle against Emu would be to choose a place that is not the home of any of them. For example, Mariajoa, the world capital. It is home to the Tenryubito, but not to the people we know. If the rebellion takes place there, Emu could not use the Domi Reversi on outsiders. And here I want to add that, for example, characters like Nami, we don't know exactly her origin, since she was found in the middle of a storm. It wouldn't surprise me at all if this theory is true, they end up giving a Domi Reversi to Nami in the place we least expect, and it is revealed to be her homeland. It would be interesting. Laughdale might be another neutral ground for everyone, except perhaps for Joy Boy in the past. And anyway, a neutral place neutralizes the Domi Reversi. Then they would also have to avoid geographical traps, as Emu could cunningly try to drag certain enemies to locations where he can convert them. We might see attempts by the world government to force battles, say in Elba, Wano, Arabasta, or other allied kingdoms of origin. All this to use the Domi Reversi there. People, if suddenly the Revolutionary Army incites local rebellions, Emu could appear on those islands to convert all the rebels there. This back and forth would make the heroes have to think twice about where they position their forces. An interesting angle is what happens with characters whose home no longer exists or is unknown. For example, Marshall D. Teach is not supposed to be born in God Valley, as rocks took them there once they were born. So for now, Teach has no homeland to return to, since if it were finally God Valley, it was erased from the map. An interesting thing is that we know the ancient kingdom was destroyed 800 years ago, and this could perfectly fit with the notion that the D's are the natural enemies of the gods, because if you can't subdue them with your most feared power due to having destroyed their land, that would explain why they are so feared. That is to say, it will be very crucial how Imu will seek to recreate certain situations like Elbaf or God Valley, while the people who face him should aim for the opposite, to not end up on one of those islands. But this will depend on their knowledge of his ability, meaning it's like a game of the same kind it references. But pay attention, because now we come to the most important part. We have explored the potential weakness of the Domi Reversi, but there remains a very important question: how to undo its effects on those who have already been converted, because it is useless to avoid being reversed if Imu already has an army of invincible demons. This is where another crucial detail that has not been given in the story comes into play. One comes from an unexpected source. Dracul Mihawk, yes, the best swordsman in the world, left us a very interesting observation during the Marineford War regarding Monkey D. Luffy in the midst of the chaos of Marineford. Mihawk noticed that Luffy possesses a strange ability, and he said that he had the capacity to turn those around him into allies very easily, even former enemies or strangers, simply through the strength of his charisma and determination. Mihawk explicitly stated that this ability is the most dangerous in the whole world. Think about this, not Luffy's fruit, not Nika's fruit, not his haki, but the most fearsome thing about Luffy is his gift for winning allies. And this phrase takes on a new meaning when we put it in the context of the Domi Reverso. Imu forces people to be his allies, his puppets, while Luffy inspires people to join him as allies from the heart. They are two opposite sides of the same coin. On one hand, a false loyalty imposed by a spell. On the other, a true loyalty born from trust and hope. Mihawk, being someone who values individual strength, was very impressed and perhaps alarmed to see how Luffy could, without realizing it, add even enemy pirates to his cause during the war. That dangerous ability of Luffy could be the antidote against Imu's dangerous ability. But how could Luffy counter that Domi Reversi? Well, there are several ways in which his influence could make a difference. We know that the demons created by Imu retain some personality trait deep down. Although they are intoxicated by power and out of control, it is not that they completely lose who they were. This means that perhaps they can reach them emotionally or remind them who they are. And if there's someone capable of reaching the heart even of enemies, it's Luffy. We've seen it countless times. Luffy makes friends even while fighting. Characters who started off opposing him like Robin, Frankie, or even temporary enemies like Bon Clay, Mr. 3, or Hancock ended up on his side thanks to his ability and inspiring character. The mere presence of Luffy and his determination could crack Imu's control over an ancient ally turned demon. For example, let's consider Dory and Broggy, who have become violent demons. Don't you think that Usopp and Luffy could make them remember their pride as warriors of Elbaf, their bonds, promises, and get them to fight again against Imu's influence? It's possible. Luffy could literally turn the tables by restoring the original person that Imu tried to suppress. And this is important, because in Elbaf we saw when Dory and Broggy are destroying Elbaf itself under Imu's control, Usopp starts shouting at them, asking what they are doing, if they have no pride in being the warriors of Elbaf. And this scene is not there for nothing. Maybe Usopp will have a moment where he can help this Domi Reversi to turn around. But beyond his personal charisma, Luffy now has enormous symbolic weight. He has been revealed as the incarnation of Nika, the sun god and warrior of liberation. According to legend, Nika was a deity who would bring liberation to the slaves and joy to the world, freeing them from their oppressive masters. So what better embodiment of that prophecy than to free people turned into demons against their will? Imu enslaves and Nika liberates. Monkey D. Luffy, bearer of the Ito Ito no Mi fruit model Nika, is literally destined to free those who are chained, whether physically chained as slaves or mentally chained with a power like the Domi Reversa. We can anticipate a powerful scene where Luffy, with his contagious laughter and joy of Nika, breaks the darkness surrounding Imu's demons. In fact, Luffy's power in 5th gear, his Nika form, turns the environment into something cartoonish and full of laughter. It's hard to imagine that such an absurdly free and joyful aura wouldn't somehow affect a spell based on hatred and bloodlust. In the story of One Piece, laughter and freedom always triumph over oppression and fear. It's a recurring theme. Luffy could very well immunize or free others with that sun laughter. Another possibility is that Luffy ends up doing what he does best, turning enemies into friends. What if some of Imu's own demons rebel thanks to Luffy? Mihawk called Luffy the man with the most formidable power, the power to make allies. It wouldn't be far-fetched for one of these demons, perhaps a character we know, to break free from control after interacting with Luffy and decide to fight against Imu. After all, Imu is using his victims as disposable pawns. Luffy values each ally. That difference could ignite the dormant will within a demon. Let's imagine, for example, Dory and Broggy turning to fight against Imu. In short, Luffy represents the natural counterbalance to Domi Reversi. Imu manipulates the bond with the homeland to enslave. But, as I have said many times, the most important thing to keep in mind is that One Piece is a manga. One Piece is a work. One Piece is something that has to be conveyed to the fans. It has to reach your heart and your eyes. That is to say, simply having Luffy stand in front of the people with the Domi Reversi and convince them because he is Nika would be fine, but something would be missing. We need to have a reason. We need to have a trigger. Simply, this is not enough. In fact, this would even cause greater tension in the community, since simply reversing the Domi Reversi because of your good looks or your fruit would just be bland and nothing more. So let's go to something very important. There is something that has characterized Luffy since he entered the state of the 5th gear. And if you remember, the first thing we see when Luffy starts transforming into the 5th gear is that you begin to hear something like drums, the so-called drums of liberation. This is present at all times during the final fight against Kaido in the Wano arc, and it is shown to be something totally impressive, something that resonates everywhere and that everyone hears. Later, we realize that these drums of liberation are a kind of song or something like that, which even the Buccaneers themselves have danced to, who had the sun god Nika as their god. And we have already seen Kuma's father, or Kuma himself, or even Bonnie dance as if they were Nika with the drums of liberation. Moreover, when we have seen the giants, they have also made the gesture of dancing like Nika. They have danced doing the dance of liberation, with the drums of liberation. It is something that is present all the time. And here I am going to throw in an important fact from the manga, which is that Luffy, from the moment he started his journey, always said he wanted a musician. And later in the story, we met Brook, who joined the crew and is now the musician of the crew. One of Brook's greatest features is Binks' Sake, a legendary song from One Piece. And in case you didn't know, this song was written by Oda. He wrote all the lyrics and said he wanted to give this song a lot of importance. He himself said that he wanted this song to be so important that it would even be studied in schools in the future. That is to say, he put a lot of care and attention into the song, into the music. And although I have a video pending that explains all this in great detail, the One Piece Film Red movie is closely related to Imu. I will explain everything in detail later, because it really is going to be a long video and I have to explain many things, but to help you understand the similarity very simply, I show you this panel where we see Uta sitting on a throne with swords stuck in the ground, obviously referencing the empty throne with swords on the ground. A very evident sign. We also see Uta when she put on the armor that had a long pointed crown upwards, just like what Imu seems to have on top or something like that. But I go back to Uta, who is supposed to be symbolizing Imu in that movie in a very subtle way, is related to music. Everything has to do with music. The movie is practically a musical. That is to say, music is being given a very key importance. Returning again to the topic of how to solve the Domi Reversi and the Drums of Liberation, I think Oda is keeping something interesting for the future. I think he wants to instill a lot of fear in us with the Domi Reversi. We have seen it now with Rocks, and with Harold, we will also see it once we reach that point in the flashback. We have practically seen that yes, the Domi Reversi was given. We have even seen how Luffy's allies have already risen to fight against the Divine Knights, and also to fight against Gumko and Imu, but Luffy has not risen yet, since Luffy, when he rises, will be when the confrontations are already unfolding. Possibly Imu is not fighting anyone yet. And when Luffy arrives in his 5th gear form, covering that distance, he has to climb from the lower level of Elbaf to the middle level, where they are in the tree, which is a huge distance. When he arrives and those drums of liberation start to resonate, they will provoke something in the giants, and surely those drums will already start to awaken the giants a little. Here are several options we can develop. The first is that the drums of liberation plus Luffy's words are what reverse the Domi Reversi, which would be incredible, and I think it makes sense. I mean, they are the drums of liberation, the god of liberation. Luffy is related to liberation, liberating. He frees you from the Domi Reversi. I think it's the part that makes the most sense of all. And then we have an addition that I would like, which is for Brook to intervene. And perhaps with the drums of liberation playing in the background, he could play a song. I would like Binks' Sake to harmonize with those drums to amplify the melody. And maybe, using his own ability to move souls, he could move the souls corrupted by the Domi Reversi and fix them or something. And I think that would be quite interesting. Maybe Luffy can do it on a smaller scale, but thanks to Brook, it intensifies much more. Also, let's keep in mind that Brook seems to have had a history with Gumko, which will also be important because we will see what happened with Gumko, those memories that came to Gumko, where they came from, what the relationship between these two is. Precisely, Imu has possessed Gumko, which is very important, obviously, and I think this would be quite key. In fact, I think it's quite evident, just as it was very evident at the time that Rock's Daikzebek was going to be affected by the Domi Reversi in God Valley, which finally happened. I see it as very evident that the key to overcoming this ability of Emu is going to be Luffy's fruit. And I know it's very cliche, I know there are people who might not like it and that being predictable is not something people like, but for me it's not a problem. For me it depends more on the way it's handled, the way everything is interpreted, and the way it's presented. Since more or less, yes, we know what's going to happen, but it's also true that Oda can't be surprising us with absolutely everything all the time, as he's been doing manga for 25 years and more than 1,100 chapters, heading towards 1,200 already. So for me, it's quite evident that this is going to happen. Luffy with the fruit will be able to reverse Imu's Domi Reversi, and this, precisely, is going to be that great nerf to the Domi Reversi, because that's exactly why Imu was afraid of Nika, was afraid of this fruit, was afraid of this person, of this Joy Boy, because he knew that with Nika's fruit it was something that could reverse his own power. Something that even elevates, adds more value to the figure of liberation, as it would not be talking about physical slaves, but about conceptual slaves, mental slaves, about not being the owner of your own mind and your own actions, something that comes from much further back, and that the whole concept of slaves was in a way because of the Domi Reversi, and that now it has led to real slaves. For me, this would be very interesting, and if well handled and well written, which I trust Oda quite a bit in this regard, I think it would greatly enhance Luffy's character and would significantly nerf the Domi Reversi. This obviously wouldn't make the Domi Reversi completely useless, because as we've seen, if Nika isn't involved, that power is terrifying. Imu can go to any island, turn any person into a demon, and make them destroy or do whatever he wants under his will. And on top of that, as I said, with incredible regeneration. So if Luffy is not in the way, that person has no way to save themselves. So this is why I personally am not at all worried about the Domi Reversi. It doesn't scare me at all, and I don't think it's an ability that will break the logic of the series or anything like that. I know many people thought, and maybe after this video you've changed your opinion, that this ability was too impressive and too strong, but I truly believe that Oda won't take it to that point, that Oda will really hold back. And let's see, people, One Piece has power levels that keep rising, and we're seeing things that are very crazy, but this isn't going to be Dragon Ball, people. We're not gonna have characters of such magnitude, not at all. I think Imu, with that regeneration he seems to have, and the Domi Reversi is already quite good, especially considering that he won't be the final villain, and that the final villain will be Teach avenging his father. But well, that's another topic. In fact, if you want to see how Oda has already explained how Blackbeard Teach is going to be the final villain and not Imu, and how he has been hinting at it in the manga, the first theory we are going to discuss is something that directly tries to relate the names we know from the Davy clan with another person. As of today, we know that Rock's D. Zebek belonged to the Davy clan, and that he is the person who revealed the existence of this clan to us, as he hid his name by calling himself Rocks when his name was Davy. And it also mentions that the world government tried to hide this clan, given that a certain specialty has been attributed to this clan, a specific tone has been given to it, because we know that the government has had other members of the D clan in its own navy, such as Monkey D. Garp, Monkey D. Dragon, Jaguar D. Saul and someone else that Oda will introduce from now until the end of the work, and the world government has done nothing. In contrast, with the Davy clan, we have seen everything that has happened in God Valley, the importance they have given it, and everything Rock's D. Zebek tells us, who also says that it is likely because, even though he does not have much information about this Davy clan, he knows they are descendants of Davy Jones. Important phrase, because let's remember that when he saw Imu-sama, which hasn't been talked about much, it went a bit unnoticed that Rock stood in front of Imu in the flower chamber and taunted him as he wanted. He said he was a big fan of Davy Jones, and this was obviously a nod to say that he was from the Davy clan, plain and simple. this, which at first we saw as a very curious phrase, and that simply seemed a bit unnoticed, we have finally seen as a kind of nod, a kind of tease, as if saying, I know about Davy Jones, I am a big fan of him, and I know there is something about this man that you did not like, and therefore this Davy clan has already attracted a lot of attention and generated much expectation. Then we have the case of the Son of Rocks D. Zebek, who is Marshall D. Teach, who we currently know is called Davy D. Teach. And so, this character is also someone who has sparked a lot of interest in the entire One Piece world, becoming one of the 4 emperors, being the first character to have consumed 2 devil fruits, as far as we know, and being an imminent danger to the world government and to the entire stability of power and the world of One Piece. A character that could be considered, at least I consider it that way, as the final villain of One Piece, even above Musume, but I'm not going to get into that topic of who will be the final villain and who won't, because I think that's for another video, and I've already mentioned it several times. The thing is, we know these 2 members. We know them more or less well as far as it goes. It's true that we haven't had very extensive development of either of them, although perhaps in the Rocks flashback we've learned much more than we initially expected. It's true that there are many things left to see, and many things to learn about these 2. Well, there is a character who is their ancestor, named Davy D. Jones, and he is the character about whom we do not have information yet, but it is true that he has been mentioned before in One Piece, and when I say before, I mean in the Foxy arc, since Chopper asks Robin who Davy Jones is, without mentioning the D. In between, because we didn't know what a D was, well, Robin mentions that he is an ancient pirate who died a long time ago and fell to the bottom of the sea, and there is even talk of Davy Jones's locker as something very important. We will discuss this much more in depth in a theory at the end of the video, but the clear thing is that this character was very important, so much so that, as Rocks D. Zebek himself says, being someone as dangerous as he was important, it suggests to us that he has a connection with the world government, why they hid his name, why they hid the D. I suppose because if you notice, if Robin calls him Davy Jones and not David D. Jones, it's because that D is also hidden. That is to say, there is something similar here to what they tried to do with Gol D. Roger, hiding the D of a very important character. Well, the first theory is precisely about this, and of course it is said that Davy Jones was a very important pirate and even has a bit of a bad reputation, at least in popular culture. In the Legends of the Real World, as we will discuss later, and I will explain in much more detail, because one of these theories fully develops everything about Davy Jones, so you can understand it well in the real world, it is true that there is the typical stereotype of a bad pirate, an evil pirate, a pirate we could liken to a Rocks, a Blackbeard, and that fits very well with that profile, a very chaotic pirate, and who does not? We would not associate at all with Luffy or something like that, since the theory says that Davy Jones was Joy Boy. And this is very important because there are many people here who make a big mistake, and that is when they hear about Joy Boy. There is a large part of the One Piece fandom, which I must say surprises me, who think that Joy Boy is the name of Joy Boy, when it is not. Joy Boy is a nickname. Joy Boy means, well, happy boy, a happy person. It's a nickname given to a person who probably had a personality very similar to Luffy because they share the same will, and if you had to describe Luffy, you would say he's a joyful boy, right? It's a perfect description. So, it's a nickname given to a person, and it's the nickname of Joy Boy. Not his name, we don't know Joy Boy's name. And there are several theories about the name of Joy Boy. Could I bring 5 theories about Joy Boy or something like that later on? Let me know in the comments if you want me to bring it, or if you have any theory about Joy Boy, but it is said that the real name of Joy Boy was David Jones, and that this was the name of Joy Boy. Some might think this doesn't make sense, but let's see. Let's analyze the situation. When it's said that this doesn't make sense, the idea is that it can't be because the descendants are Rocks and Blackbeard, who are precisely a will, let's say, opposite to what Joy Boy was, and who don't fit at all with this, who moreover don't seem like the type of people who would descend from someone like him. But in One Piece, it has been shown many times that being a parent or child is irrelevant in many aspects. Yamato and Kaido are nothing alike in personality. We even have the example of Shanks and Garland, where each follows a different way of life simply because they were raised in very different environments, even though one is the father of the other. So, the family issue personally doesn't matter to me. And if we have to add to this that Joy Boy existed 800 years ago, or perhaps a little more, it is obvious that over 800 years, families can become corrupted and end up having descendants like Rox or Blackbeard who are a bit different from what their ancestor was 800 years ago, which makes a lot of sense. So I think this argument used to dismiss the theory that David Jones's Joy Boy is something that can be overlooked a bit, and personally I wouldn't pay much attention to it. To me, proposing the idea that Davy Jones's Joy Boy seems to fit quite well, since if we analyze it from a perspective where this is really the case and assume it is something real, we see that it fits quite well. We see that he is a pirate with a legend that labeled him as a sea demon or something like that, which would make a lot of sense because the world government has shown us many times that it manipulates information, manipulates the truth, and even tries to make people believe different versions of the same story, altering them even completely to the point that they do not resemble the originals at all. We have the explanation that they have taken the day from Davy Jones, said by Rox D. Xebec, and even that it surely has to do with him because he is a descendant of him. Then we have the foreshadowing, which we could interpret in this way, of Rox telling Emu that he is a fan of Davy Jones, implying that surely Emu, who probably lived in the Void Century, knew this person. That is to say, implying that there probably was a relationship. And what person could we understand had some kind of relationship with Emu? Well, Joy Boy, since it is assumed that he was the person Emu fought against 800 years ago, so maybe it could be a bit of foreshadowing. Then we have the point that Rox D. Xebec said, "I will come back later and finish you off, Emu." So this can be interpreted as something that will happen with Blackbeard, but perhaps it is something that has been repeating for a long time, and at one time happened with Joy Boy. I am not saying that Joy Boy is bad because of what we said before, but simply that they are descendants. This is something that could happen. Keep in mind that when talking about pirates, let's say in the hierarchy of supreme pirates in real life, in mythology or pirate legends, the most powerful pirate, the fiercest pirate, is Davy Jones. He is like the quintessential pirate. And if we want to represent this figure of Joy Boy in One Piece, representing it with Davy Jones, I think it can be something interesting, something that everyone understands, something that fits well with the real life aspect, and I think it makes sense. Well, I am not the creator of the theory, I am just conveying it, and I have to say that I like it as a theory, honestly. I wouldn't tell you that it's my definitive theory by any means, because I think in this video we are going to see very interesting theories about this, but the fact of suggesting that the name Joy Boy has already been shown and is Davy Jones, I think it would be very interesting. Now, as I say, there are other options that we will discuss here, and maybe they would be better. As for the name of Joy Boy, well, I don't know what to tell you, but I am quite sure that as of today, we already know the name of Joy Boy. And this obviously does not mean that I know what Joy Boy's name is, but that we have probably heard it already. Let's remember Binks' sake. Binks is probably going to be someone we see at some point in the world of One Piece, in the Void Century, or even before. And who is to say that Binks is not the name of Joy Boy? I think it would make quite a bit of sense for it to be called something D. Binks. I think it would make a lot of sense. Even if he's called Seikei and the song was made for him and he's called Seikei D. Binks, it would be incredible. Or maybe one of the other random names we've overlooked throughout the work of One Piece. The name Nolan. It could be Nolan D. And that this is also the name of Joy Boy and that he is from that clan. I don't know. The thing is, I am quite convinced that as of today, we do know the name of Joy Boy, but we still don't know which of all these names it is. And obviously, among them is the option of Davy Jones. I like it as a first theory. Let me know in the comments what you think, and let's go with the second one. Regarding the second theory, let's go with something very similar to what we just discussed. Something very, very similar, so we will have the same foundations. Let's consider who Davy Jones is, the importance of Davy Jones, all the mythology surrounding him, and the type of character he is. But this time, let's assume that this character, the identity this character has, is a very different one. It's not Joy Boy. It's not Joy Boy at all, but something much simpler, something much easier to interpret, and something that everyone will understand very easily because the same pattern keeps repeating. When we see Rox D. Xebec and when we see Blackbeard, we understand that they are the negative side, so to speak, of Roger and Luffy. They are like the antithesis, like the perfect enemy, and like a perfectly written and perfectly matched counterpart. They are exactly the opposite, and they are mirrors that look very good and are parallels that fit very well within the work. Now, having been revealed, all the information we have about Davy Jones, and seeing that a kind of pattern is followed with Rox and Blackbeard, who are very similar, who have that same will, who also want to cause chaos, even though they might not be as bad as we initially thought, but simply have very bad traits, though not to overly extreme levels, and we might even see other things. Well, it could be that the thing with Davy Jones is something very, very simple. And it's not that he is Joy Boy, but rather that he was that evil Joy Boy, which in fact I have mentioned many times on this channel. I have called him Sad Boy or something like that. Then on top of that, the thing about Sad and Bo came out. Well, it seems a bit like there might be some reference to that, but I'm not gonna talk about that. Let's talk about Davy Jones, and just as I say, he could be this counterpart to Joy Boy. Throughout the entire history of One Piece, we have been told about Joy Boy, we have heard of Joy Boy, we have seen the mural, we have had Amu. But we have never been told, at least to us, about that whole counterpart of Joy Boy, when it is quite obvious that it existed, because it existed in Roger's time, it exists in Luffy's time, and it makes a lot of sense that just as we had this will with Luffy, Roger, and Joy Boy, that this will is held by Blackbeard, Rox, and this person, who very likely, based on how they are introduced in the plot, how it is explained, how the story developed to the point where they told us this, and the next person who inherited this, Will was a member of the same family. Well, possibly this counterpart is the enemy of Joy Boy, Davy Jones. As I mentioned before, Davy D. Jones was brought up by Robin in Long Ring Long Land, and we have the Davy backfight, this thing introduced by Foxy that has the name Davy in the middle, which we actually saw Rox use to form his crew. The origin of this is still unknown to us. Later on in a theory, we will address this as well because it is interesting, but we do not know the origin of this tradition, and we have seen that Rox has also done this to implant it in our minds and not let us forget it. So is it possible that maybe when we see Davy Jones, we will see how the Davy backfight is created and that it is a ruse, a trick, a masterstroke by Davy Jones, that his part was the same as Rox was for Roger, and the same as Blackbeard was for Luffy, an antithesis being the antithesis of Luffy, and that we see how he creates this, and it has a certain relevance in the story at even much higher levels than we thought. I think it makes sense. As I said before, when we think of Davy D. Jones, we think of the ultimate pirate. We think of something very, very pirate-like, but it's also thought of as a bad part, a negative part, a very chaotic part. And seeing how Oda is playing with the theme of inherited will with Rox, with Blackbeard and everything, I think it makes sense. By the way, I'm gonna keep calling Xebec Rox all the time. I'm not gonna call him Davy D. Xebec or anything, really. I'm going to keep calling him Rox because I'm used to it, and it will be hard for me to get used to something else. I know you might think this theory is a bit simple, a bit obvious, very straightforward, but sometimes in One Piece, we overthink things, imagining very crazy ideas, and in the end, Oda takes the shortest, simplest path. And sometimes we think so much about things that we can't see what's right in front of us. Maybe there is no Joy Boy or anything, and it's simply the antithesis, as they have shown us with Blackbeard and Rox, the antithesis. Something that is explained, something we have seen, something the viewer understands clearly, and when Davy Jones is presented, we easily understand through 2 or 3 dialogues who Davy Jones is, how he is the antithesis, and we see that's it, what kind of character he is, because we have seen it reflected in Rox and Blackbeard. I think it's quite simple, and makes a lot of sense. On a personal level, I think it makes sense. It is true that I like the idea of it being a simple theory, but for me, since I'm a bit crazy, I always like it when we don't expect anything, when it catches us off guard, when we go left and it surprises us from the right. I always like to give everything a twist, and I would love it if we didn't expect at all what happens with this character, that it would come from another angle, and that maybe, as I say, it would be Joy Boy. Now, I think it's quite obvious that this theory needs to be discussed, it needs to be addressed, and above all, you need to let me know in the comments what you think of this theory, because it's only the second one, we have 3 more to go, but despite being a relatively simple theory, I think it has a good chance of being true and coming to pass. But well, let me know what you think, and let's move on to the third. Moving on to the third theory, let's go to something curious, something that might be revealed in the upcoming manga chapters. I hope it takes a bit longer, honestly, because making videos and then maybe spoilers come out or something, and this information gets revealed or not, and this is something I don't like. I don't read the spoilers personally. I prefer to read the chapters directly and enjoy reading them, but there's always people in the comments saying, haha, you got it right. Haha, you didn't get it right with the spoilers. So it's a bit uncomfortable. Well, this theory about the Davy clan is about something that is a capability of the clan itself, as if they were a different clan, as if they were a clan that goes far beyond the name, as if they had a characteristic that the rest of the clans did not have. And it's that this Davy clan, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, has been given a very different importance from everything we expected, from everything previously shown in One Piece. Because as I said, we've seen people from the D clan whom the government has had close by, and they haven't given them much importance. And it is true that except for the case of Roger, where obviously because he became the Pirate King, they hid the D, we haven't seen anything too crazy. I mean, they had Garp, they had Jaguar D, Saul, they had Dragon, who were people from the D clan, and they were not given importance. Maybe they were from the Monkey or Jaguar family, which they didn't care much about, perhaps because they were slightly more irrelevant families. Well, here's the thing, what if the Davy clan has something that the rest of the clans don't have? And when I say one thing, it is a very important, very dangerous characteristic that we have already seen, and that perhaps there could be certain hints throughout the story that lead us to think this. What if the Davy clan is capable of consuming 2 devil fruits, or even more, which we still do not know? For now, the only person we have seen capable of consuming 2 devil fruits as of the recording date is Marshall D. Teach, who is from the Davy clan. Who is Davy D. Teach the only person? To this day, we have no explanation for why Blackbeard managed to consume these 2 devil fruits. There are many theories, many. I can even have other theories, but there is a very important, very striking one that talks about it being related to the Davy clan. First of all, because as I say, it seems that a different importance has been given to the Davy clan, a more significant importance, if you will, by the world government to this clan. Perhaps it is because they know they can consume these devil fruits. But now, what kind of clue can we have to think this? The first thing is to go to when Blackbeard is going to consume the second fruit. We see that he covers himself with a black blanket, maybe to mislead. The theory suggests it's a bit to mislead, and Shiryu asks if this doesn't work, if they will separate, and they imply that it's not something 100% certain, and that it's more like a kind of gamble, or something like that. And then we see that he eats the second fruit, and Marco mentions that Teach always had a different body. What if the Davy clan has a different body, has something different that makes them just from that clan and allows them to eat a second fruit? Then we have to remember, right at the mention of the Davy clan's name, in the Great Revelation by Rox D. Zebek, that he mentions that one thing he told Teach and his wife was to trust in the Davy clan. And perhaps this is the phrase that Blackbeard has followed throughout his life. Maybe he thought about that, about trusting the Davy clan, knowing that he had the ability to consume 2 or 3 fruits, and that obviously is a very beastly power. So he waited and waited to get the fruit he needed, trusted the Davy clan, ate the second fruit, which was Whitebeard's, and maybe by trusting more in the Davy clan, he can eat that third one. Implying that indeed the Davy clan is something different, something that sets it apart from the rest of the clans, and justifying why the world government has gone to such lengths with this Davy clan to hide the name of Davy Jones and turn it into an urban legend to make the Davy clan itself have to hide, something we haven't seen with the other clans, and this makes it a bit different. Additionally, justifying one of the craziest things we've seen a character do in One Piece, and it's from the Davy clan. Because I repeat, precisely the craziest thing, which has no solution, which is a great mystery, which is a big problem for everyone, is that someone has consumed 2 devil fruits, and the little information we have is talking about his body, that his father told him to trust in the Davy clan, and let's not forget that Saturn told Katarina Devon and Van Augur that Teach came from a special lineage, obviously referring to the Davy clan. But why mention special lineage when, I repeat, there are other D, and this is not mentioned at any time. Not even the name of Luffy, which is Monkey D. Luffy, is given any special connotation. Not at all. We have seen how Alberosa has talked about Luffy, has talked about the Gomu Gomu, has talked about the Nika fruit, but has never talked about lineage, being like the Monkey D clan. Well, it didn't matter. And maybe it's because the Monkey D clan isn't relevant, but another type of clan, the Davy clan. I don't know, to me this theory seems very interesting. It seems simple, very simple to explain, and I think if it's an explanation for why Blackbeard has eaten 2 fruits, I might like it. It's not the theory I have in mind. I've already explained it to you a couple of times. I'm not going to go into that, but I find this very interesting because perhaps Oda, if he doesn't want to complicate things and wants all his readers to understand it simply, says that it's from the Davy Clan, that the Davy Clan can consume 2 fruits, that the government was after them because of their ability, because it's something they're born with, and that's it. He doesn't complicate things, that's it. Marco didn't understand about his body because the Davy Clan was hidden. I think it's something very logical and makes a lot of sense. Maybe something about this will be revealed in God Valley. I don't know, let's hope so, but let it take a little longer, a month if possible, 2 months, 3 months, however long it takes will be fine. But let's get information about this, and I think it's a simple way to explain it. As I said, I'm not entirely convinced because I have another idea that I like more, but the idea evaluating it fully in itself and from an objective point of view, I think it's a quite interesting and quite good theory. So as I said, I like it quite a bit, but well, let me know in the comments what you think of this 3rd theory and let's move on to the 4th. Regarding the 4th theory, let's take an even crazier twist to all of this. In the first 2 theories, we talked about the identity of Davy Jones. We talked about Joy Boy and that evil Joy Boy of that time. Well, let's go even further. Let's give it the ultimate twist. What if Davy Jones is Sogeking? No, it's a joke, it's a joke, one moment. It would have been incredible if I came up with a well-argued 20-minute theory on why Davy Jones is Sogeking, but that's not going to happen. Let's go with something else. Let's go with another identity. There is a very, very important character in One Piece, about whom we know nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean not even his name, because I am quite convinced that it is a nickname, what we know about him, and that's it. We don't have his voice, we don't have his face, we don't have his name, we don't know where he comes from, we are not even clear on what he is. And it's Imu. What if Davy Jones is Imu? Some might say this doesn't make sense. Okay, let's analyze the situation. As I mentioned before, the legend of Davy Jones, even though it's manipulated by the government, is still quite well known in the world of One Piece. In the pirate world, the name Davy Jones is quite well known, as we have seen it at some point in the work, and if the world government had really wanted to completely hide this name, being a somewhat known name, they would have done so. Look at the name Rox D. Xebec, there aren't many characters who know it, and until practically Wano, we hadn't heard anything about him. And considering that was 40 years ago, I mean, we're talking about Davy Jones being around 800 years ago or more. That is, if 40 years ago they already hid something well, imagine 800 years ago. So why haven't they been able to completely hide something from 800 years ago? Well, there's a theory that points out the following. First of all, we know that Davy Jones had a D and that he was, well, David D. Jones. Well, there is a lot of talk that Imu could be him. Why? Because there is a very famous theory that says Imu is a D, that he is a traitor, that he betrayed the D clan and eventually became the leader of the world government. This, combined with the presentation of David D. Jones as what I say, a D, and coming from those like Rox and Blackbeard, are 2 characters who tend towards betrayal, who tend towards evil, who tend towards that desire to achieve everything and accomplish their goals. And it could make for a very interesting twist if it is revealed that Imu is Davy Jones. Because let's think, if the world government hasn't managed to completely eliminate the legend of Davy Jones, it's because that name, it was a very powerful name, very important. Notice that the name Joy Boy is practically extinct, practically erased, but Davy Jones is part of a legend. Why? Perhaps because this character became more known than Davy Jones for his own betrayal. Perhaps Davy Jones, because of the betrayal he committed and how he allied with the other kingdoms, and all the things he did, that name spread across the kingdoms, remaining somewhat because the enemy they had was Joy Boy, but they didn't give importance to this. They gave importance the one who betrayed the D clan and who helped the other kingdoms, being this Imu. As I say, Imu is surely not his name. Imu is surely a nickname that Oda is using for some reason. We still don't understand why, and very likely, as I say, it's Imu's nickname and not his name. The theory, which I repeat is not my theory, is a general theory, let's say, suggests that this Davy Jones is the ultimate pirate, the person Joy Boy fought against 800 years ago, and who is now an Imu. And a very strong clue might be precisely when Rock said he was a big fan of Davy Jones, this being a nod from Oda, not for Imu, not for Rocks, but for the viewers, mentioning that name right in front of him as he is saying it to Davy Jones. Imagine the revelation that Imu is Davy Jones, and we see this page again. We will be shocked because we will say, did Oda really have the nerve to tell us he's a big fan of Davy Jones right in front of Davy Jones himself, without us even having a clue about this? And on top of that, with a character like Rocks, who is his descendant, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it would be very, very top. Analyzing this theory, let's say, more in depth, I'm not sure if it completely convinces me. I think that Davy Jones being erased by the government wouldn't convince me if it were because they want to erase him because he is Imu. I would prefer if they tried to erase him because he was something different, because he was an enemy, or someone, as I say, evil, but not precisely Imu. I don't know, it's a theory that doesn't completely convince me. I know that in the comments, more than one of you are going to say, hey, I like this theory, I find it interesting. Or it might even be that someone has already thought of this theory before. As I said, the theory is not mine. The theory is general, let's say, from the internet, like all the ones in this video. But even so, regarding the true identity of Davy Jones, I think the three most relevant theories we have today, or that I have considered and found most relevant and important, are precisely the three I have mentioned. Now we will move on to the last one, which is quite extensive, where we will cover many things, but as for the true identity of this character, be careful, because perhaps Oda has more to say. It's no coincidence that so many theories come up. If there are so many, it's because there's material to play with. And when Oda has good material, we know what he's capable of doing, which are true wonders. So, well, let me know in the comments what you think about this fourth theory. Leave it there a bit in the comments. And now, let's move on to the fifth and final theory of the video, which is very long, but I think you're gonna love it. And it's quite clear that the canonical information we have about Davy Jones in One Piece is very little. That's why I'm going to do my best to build mountains with the little pieces of data we have, but as of today, with what we have, it's impossible to put together a complete story. So actually, the only reason it's even possible to discuss Davy Jones is because Davy Jones is a real-life pirate legend. That is, we can draw information from real life, since from the series, well, for now, we don't have much, and I'm sure that most people who have watched One Piece have also seen Pirates of the Caribbean, and vice versa. I, for example, have not seen Pirates of the Caribbean, but I had to research to make this video. I should watch them, let me know in the comments. As I was saying, Davy Jones is a very well-known name in popular culture, and it is logical to assume that although there will obviously be some differences, much of Davy Jones's story in One Piece will be based on existing mythology, just as Oda has done with other legendary characters. Exactly like the character of Loki, the giant prince, because if we look at him and compare him with the Loki from Norse mythology, at first glance, they are very different. But in the fundamental and most important aspects, they are essentially the same, while being, as I said, quite different at the same time. Anyway, I might be going on a bit, but I want us to think of Davy Jones with that mindset. That's how Oda usually works. When you better understand the legend that inspires a character, you will better understand the character itself. So let's start directly with the story of Davy Jones in mythology. And it is much simpler than one might think, because unlike many characters from various mythologies that Oda has adapted in One Piece, Davy Jones himself does not have a very concrete story. Historically, Davy Jones is basically just a name associated with pirate life. In fact, when talking about Davy Jones, it almost always refers to Davy Jones's locker, which is a nautical euphemism for death at sea. In pirate tradition, Davy Jones is often presented as a sort of ruler of the pirate underworld. In many representations, he is literally depicted as the demon of the sea, so if we base it only on that, it seems we don't know much about Davy Jones, and the theory would have to end here. But actually no, because there are two additional resources we can use to reconstruct the story of this character. The first would be the legend and mythology of Davy Jones, which has always intrigued people for a long time. It is natural that there are academic theories about what his real origin might be. Even if we don't know the exact truth, these theories are relevant to our discussion. And the second thing is that sometimes the historical truth behind an inspiration for One Piece is not the most important. That's how myths and legends are. Perhaps there was some real event that originated them, but over time they become stories told in different ways, with many creative liberties. That's why the character of Davy Jones in One Piece could very well end up having much in common with the popular fictional version of Davy Jones. For example, as I say, the one from Pirates of the Caribbean. In addition to the little we know in the manga, Oda is not exactly a purist of mythology, and I hate to break illusions, but in the original legends, Davy Jones was not a giant squid, nor did he sail on the Flying Dutchman. In fact, the Flying Dutchman was another separate pirate legend that Disney decided to mix with Davy Jones, and it really worked for them. Legends and myths tend to be that malleable. Alright, here goes a brief summary of the story of Davy Jones according to Disney and Pirates of the Caribbean. Originally, Davy Jones was simply a man, a pirate, and sailor. The exact circumstances vary in the stories, but essentially Davy Jones fell in love with a sea goddess, beautiful and fickle, named Calypso. As proof of his love, he agreed to fulfill a task that the goddess assigned him, to guide the souls of those who perished at sea to their eternal rest. The idea is that Davy Jones could only return to reunite with Calypso on her island once every 10 years. He accepted that deal out of love, but he was deceived and betrayed. When he returned to the island after 10 years hoping to find her, Calypso was not there. It's curious because many think of Davy Jones as the devil of the sea, but in Pirates of the Caribbean, the real devil is Calypso. Davy made a deal with Calypso, who would be the equivalent of the devil in that story, and he didn't get what he wanted. On the contrary, he was condemned to a rather horrible fate, doing something for all eternity that he really didn't want to do. Due to this betrayal, Davy Jones convened the First Pirate Brotherhood Council, a great alliance of pirates, and conspired with them to seize control of the seas from the goddess Calypso. Ultimately, the Brotherhood managed to imprison Calypso by trapping her essence within the body of a mortal woman. Despite achieving revenge in this way, Davy remained heartbroken by the love he had for her, so much so that due to the pain he felt, he tore out his heart with his own hands and locked it away in the famous dead man's chest. In practice, you can see it as Davy Jones removing his own soul. After that, he became an evil being. He renounced his sacred duty to guide souls in the afterlife and instead began recruiting those who did not want to die into his crew, basically enslaving fearful sailors. Davy Jones took advantage of people's fear of dying without fulfilling their goals, becoming something like a literal demon of the sea. Over time, the entire conflict of Pirates of the Caribbean revolves around the heart of Davy Jones. Whoever controls his heart controls the man, and this is where the story gains interesting depth. You see, Davy Jones was part of the pirate council that initially united to defeat the sea goddess because they saw her as the devil to conquer, but then Davy Jones became the devil. So, the Pirate Brotherhood had to gather again and decided to release Calypso to help them fight against Davy Jones, now turned into a monster and also against the Navy. There is something cyclical in all this that fits well with the world of One Piece. Essentially, whoever holds the power ends up becoming the devil of the story. First, the sea goddess Calypso was the villain, then it was Davy Jones, then it was the trading company, which was the Navy, when it gained Davy Jones's power, and then the pirates again, when they released Calypso, making deals with the devil and ending up becoming the devil themselves in each cycle. In other words, the devil keeps changing faces, but at each stage of the adventure, the Sea Warriors are fighting against some incarnation of evil. In the end, while everyone was fighting each other, pirates against pirates, pirates against the Navy, deep down, they were all fighting for the same thing, only each side had its own vision of what the true evil to defeat was. Summarizing the story of Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones had a love story. Davy Jones was betrayed. Davy Jones lost his soul by removing his heart. Davy Jones became a demon, and the way to free him from his curse in the end was to kill him. Davy Jones had to die to be free. Now then, we will later revisit some details of Pirates of the Caribbean that I haven't mentioned yet, because I believe the story of Davy Jones in One Piece will share many of these key elements. But let's move on to what we know within the world of One Piece itself. The only real information we have been given about Davy Jones in the manga is told to us by Nico Robin during the Foxy Saga. Robin mentions that Davy Jones was a pirate from a very long time ago, and that he was cursed by a demon. And honestly, just with that, it already sounds quite close to everything we just reviewed. But as I mentioned before, even though there isn't a real historical tale of Davy Jones in our world, there are indeed investigations and theories about the origin of the name Davy Jones. It may not be the definitive truth, but it's as close as we can get to a historical basis for this legend, and it's worth discussing. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the theory that the name Davy Jones actually comes from the biblical story of the prophet Jonah. And I'll say it right away, those who are into theories know that Oda has been heavily inspired by the Bible, so this already makes some sense, right? I won't go into all the details of Jonah's story, because not all are relevant. I prefer to give a summary of who Jonah was and why he is related to Davy Jones. The most characteristic thing about Jonah is that at first he refused to obey a direct order from God. Essentially, Jonah fled from what God had commanded him to do. There are different interpretations of why he did it, but we can assume that Jonah was afraid to fulfill that divine mandate. The fact is that God had ordered Jonah something very specific, to go preach to a city full of wickedness to offer them salvation. And Jonah didn't like that idea one bit. He thought those wicked people didn't deserve to be saved. In fact, later in the story, when God actually forgives that city, Jonah gets very angry. Jonah didn't want to save the wicked. Returning to the part where Jonah flees, Jonah boarded a ship to escape the assigned mission, and then God unleashed a great storm at sea to prevent him from fleeing. The sailors on the ship panicked, and Jonah, knowing he was the cause of the disaster, confessed to them that the storm was his fault for disobeying God. He even told them to throw him into the sea to calm the storm and save their lives. This shows that Jonah was willing to face the consequences of his actions. He offered himself as a sacrifice to appease divine wrath. Although more than genuine repentance, it seemed basically a kind of resignation. Basically, Jonah preferred to die rather than fulfill the order of God that he so detested. Then, in the midst of this furious storm, the sailors finally threw Jonah into the sea. But God did not intend for Jonah to die there. Instead, he sent a great fish, traditionally interpreted as a whale, which swallowed Jonah whole. Jonah remained alive inside the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. That time, inside the belly of the cetacean, was a kind of personal purgatory for Jonah. It served for him to reflect and pray, to think about what had happened and why he was wrong to disobey. A bit of sailor context. In the nautical culture of the past, it was considered that having a Jonah on board brought bad luck. Imagine the sailors are at sea and suddenly a terrible storm breaks out. They would look at each other searching for the jinx. Who is the Jonah on this ship? Who do we have to throw overboard? That is to say, Jonah became synonymous with a person who brings bad luck at sea, and all this fits quite well with the similarity between the name Jonah and Jones. It is believed that the term Davy Jones might have originated as a deformation or evolution of Jonah. On the other hand, Davy sounds similar to devil in some old maritime languages, so some think that Davy was a nickname given to certain spirits or entities, like saying the devil Jones, which is where Davy John would come from. In short, that's how language evolves. One day, someone says something to another, others like how it sounds. Everyone starts repeating it, and in the end, no one remembers where it exactly came from. The other specific part of the legend of Davy Jones is his famous locker, Davy Jones's locker. In sailor jargon, as we said, it's a euphemism for death at sea, but it doesn't refer to death itself, rather a kind of final resting place beneath the waves. Notice that Davy Jones's locker is never exactly described as hell or the afterlife. It is more like a kind of purgatory, an intermediate place between life and death for those who die at sea. In Pirates of the Caribbean, in fact, Davy Jones's job was to guide souls to the afterlife. But first, those souls passed through Davy Jones's locker, a marine limbo before their final destination. This makes a perfect parallel with Jonah inside the whale. Jonah was in a state where he was neither dead nor alive, suspended in the darkness of the fish's belly. But why am I telling you all this? Well, because I believe that the story of Jonah could be exactly the inspiration for Oda for the character of Davy Jones in One Piece, both his personality and certain key events in his life. In general terms, Jonah was someone with a strong sense of morality, who nevertheless was filled with hatred towards the wicked. He wanted the wicked to suffer and be condemned, and it was very difficult for him to learn compassion. Jonah saw himself as a righteous man who wanted to save the innocent, but at the same time, he wished to punish the wicked mercilessly. Now, why am I so sure that Davy Jones in One Piece will be based on Jonah? Well, because knowing Jonah's story, we already have a character in One Piece whose story fits that mold too well. That character is Rox D. Xebec. For now, the information we have portrays Rox D. Xebec is surprisingly a guy with good intentions at heart. We know that Rox wanted to dethrone the Celestial Dragons and become the king of the world, but we still don't have the full story of his motives. Even so, with what we already saw in the God Valley flashback, it's very clear that his crusade implied that the world government was evil, practically the enemy of humanity in his view. Just like Jonah, who saw the sinful city as something that had to be destroyed. There is a very revealing detail in God Valley, and it is that when Rox meets the king of Elbap, who is in the holy land of Mary Geoise, Rox's face shows surprise and annoyance, and he says something like, "A giant in the holy land? Is this guy lost or what?" Rox knows that the celestial dragons enslaved giants, and seeing that giant there clearly strikes him as curious. This suggests that Rox had a sense of justice or compassion towards those who suffered under the Celestial Dragons. I might be reading too much into it, but take a look. Prince Loki of Elbaf idolizes Rox D. Zebek, and during the attack on Elbaf, when Loki faces the Holy Knights, he says, "I would never join scum like you." Considering that Loki himself has said his goal is to destroy the world, and still thinks the Celestial Dragons are much worse than him, I imagine that Loki, as a fanatic disciple of Rox, is repeating something Rox used to say. Loki hates the Celestial Dragons because Rox instilled that in him indirectly, and I think it's very significant that Loki worshipped Rox, because the narrator in the manga reveals to us that Rox D. Zebek worshipped Davy Jones. Do you see? Loki idolizes Rox. Rox idolized Davy Jones. Davy Jones, according to real-world historians, is based on Jonah. Everything is fitting into layers. Rox wants to save the world by overthrowing the evil gods, the Tenryubito, but he also wants those evildoers to get what they deserve, just like Jonah, who wanted to save the innocent, but for the wicked to burn in hell. Rox, like Jonah, rebelled against the god of his time. In this case, he rebelled against Imu, the divine figure of the world government. Jonah fled from God and embarked with some unknown sailors. Rox fled to the seas and formed a crew full of powerful pirates who were not really very loyal to him. When Jonah unleashed divine wrath, his sailors threw him overboard. When Rox caused the God Valley incident, his crew probably betrayed him, which is implied that in God Valley there were internal betrayals in the crew of, in summary, Rox D. Zebek is practically the Jonah of One Piece. And this would imply that Davy Jones, whom Rox revered, is also essentially a Jonah within the story of One Piece. So far we have associated Davy Jones with Jonah on the side of the legend, and with Rox D. Zebek due to Rox's idolatry towards him. So I think we already have a solid basis for speculation. I find it very likely that the character of Davy Jones in One Piece has a personality and background inspired by Jonah, and that his story follows some of the patterns of Jonah's story mixed with those of Davy Jones's story from Pirates of the Caribbean that we summarized earlier. But before going completely crazy, there is one last piece of the puzzle we need to mention: the Davy Back fights. We already know that Davy Jones is somehow related to that strange pirate game introduced in the Foxy Saga, because it cannot be a coincidence that Rox D. Zebek, a worshipper of Davy Jones, formed his crew through Davy Back fights. And the narrator told us that Rox recruited members from other crews using that game. And what is the premise of a Davy Back fight? Steal members from the rival crew and force them to join yours. It is a game of submission, basically. The winning captain takes the nakama from the loser. That sounds very similar to something we have already seen Imu can do, doesn't it? Think about how Imu can literally erase entire islands from the map or subjugate people at will as if they were pieces in a game. This theme of subjugating and taking what you want is present both in Imu's powers and in the Davy Back fights. It can't be a coincidence. Now let's connect the dots. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones didn't start as the devil. Jonah wasn't the devil either. Of course not, they were ordinary people or pirates who ended up in situations where the devil turned them to his cause. In One Piece, in the Foxy Saga, Sanji explains to us that pirates call Davy back the act of taking what you want from your enemies and, for example, snatching their companions. This game is named Davy, probably after Davy Jones. So what is the original background of a Davy Back fight? Well, I'm going to tell you what I suspect. I believe that the Davy Back fights were originally created to recover Davy. In other words, I sense that in ancient times, someone lost Davy Jones, lost his soul to a devil, and created this game to try to recover it. I have a very strong hunch here. I suspect that someone, perhaps Imu, or someone with Imu's power in the past, took Davy Jones's soul in a game or a bet. It could have literally been a gambling duel against the devil. That's why the Davy Back fights exist, to keep alive the possibility of reversing that outcome, to train and one day recover what was lost. As an interesting note, there is an American song called The Devil Went Down to Georgia, which is about a musician challenging the devil to a fiddle duel. If you have never heard it, I recommend it because it quite well describes the idea of beating the devil at his own game, very much in line with what I think Oda might be doing with this legend. The image I have is the following: Davy Jones challenged the devil of the sea to a game, a competition, a bet, and lost something more valuable than life. He lost his soul and, as a consequence, was forced to join the devil's crew. Imagine it, Davy Jones and his band facing a demonic being in a sort of legendary Davy Back fight, and Davy loses, and as punishment, he and perhaps part of his crew become enslaved by the devil. In The Legend of Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones tore out his heart and kept it in a chest, thus distancing his soul from himself. In One Piece, it could be similar, but with a twist. Perhaps it was the devil who tore out Davy Jones's soul and kept it somewhere, in Davy Jones's locker. In any case, the result is the same. The pirate Davy Jones ended up becoming the demon himself. Let's remember what Robin said, a pirate from a long time ago who was cursed by a demon, and what better curse than to become what you hated the most? It could be that Davy Jones was cursed, turning him into a demon under the control of the original devil. Even the small reference by Sanji in the Foxy Saga makes me think. Sanji says that taking what you want from your enemies, pirates call it Davy Backfight. And at the end of the Foxy Saga, they say that whoever breaks the rules of that game goes to Davy Jones's locker, meaning they lose their pirate soul. It all sounds like the game is very, very tied to Davy's story, and what would happen after Davy lost his soul. Well, I imagine that his nakamas, or the people who loved him, wanted to get him back. The only way to recover your lost comrade was to play against the devil again and win. That's where the tradition of the Davy Backfights would have originated. Pirates training and competing among themselves to one day be ready to challenge the devil again and recover Davy. Does it sound crazy to you? Well, think about how it fits in Pirates of the Caribbean. Davy Jones removes his heart, which is equivalent to losing his soul. He keeps it in the chest, his locker, and he himself becomes the devil of the sea. Well, in One Piece, the version would be that Davy Jones lost his soul in a game against the sea demon and ended up cursed as a demon. Davy Jones in One Piece probably challenged the Sea Devil to a game and lost, and as a consequence, he transformed into a demon, becoming just another pawn of the devil himself. Obviously, it's still an incomplete story because we're extrapolating a lot, but what a story. I hope this theory is entertaining for now and seems quite solid to you, at least as much as it does to me. At first, I asked myself the question, could Davy Jones actually have been Joy Boy? We know of two great legendary figures from the past, Joy Boy, the hero of the Void Century, and Davy Jones, this cursed pirate about whom we have some mentions, and it is logical to wonder if they could be the same. And so far, nothing I've said contradicts that possibility. It could be that Joy Boy and Davy Jones were the same person, but interpreted in different ways by history. But I'll be honest, it would seem a bit dull to leave it at that. I prefer to raise the stakes and offer you something you've never heard before. I want you to say, what the heck did I just hear? When you finish listening to this theory. So even though Davy Jones could simply be Joy Boy, I'm going to propose something even crazier for you to really have something to think about. Until now, my hypotheses have been relatively logical as far as it goes, but hold on, because now comes the truly outrageous part of the theory. Let's remember, in Pirates of the Caribbean, the story of Davy Jones is a tragic love story. Davy Jones made a pact with the woman he loved, Calypso, and ended up feeling betrayed by her. But beware, in the movies, Calypso didn't actually betray him with bad intentions. She confesses to Davy that she still loved him, but her wild and untamed nature forced her to be free, not to be tied down waiting 10 years for him. Basically, Calypso could not stop being free because freedom was her essence. Davy Jones, blinded by pain, interpreted it as an unforgivable betrayal and demonized her in his mind. But in reality, it wasn't exactly like that. There are interesting parallels here with One Piece. We could compare Calypso, that goddess of untamable freedom, with the idea of the sun god Nika, the embodiment of freedom itself. Even with Luffy himself, Calypso had a nature that could not be chained. Something like absolute freedom governed her life. And what does Luffy represent if not freedom? Calypso did not wait for Davy Jones because she could not betray herself. She could not stop being free. Davy Jones, in his pain, perceived her as an evil traitor, like the devil of the sea. But in reality, he simply did not understand her nature. In One Piece, I think we will see something similar. Davy Jones probably became enemies with someone he cared about a lot, a friend, a loved one, maybe even his own captain, because he felt that person failed him or betrayed him. But it may be that Davy was wrong, that he didn't understand the higher reason behind his friend's action. Let's go back to Jonah. It's easy to imagine that Jonah felt betrayed by God. God wanted to save the wicked people that Jonah believed unworthy of salvation. Perhaps Jonah even thought, why is God asking me for something so absurd? Is he playing with the devil by putting me in the middle of his game? Jonah might have come to believe that God himself was deceiving him or putting him on the devil's side for no apparent reason. And then Jonah, confused and angry, betrayed God by disobeying him and fleeing. I would like to think that something like that happened in the story of Davy Jones in One Piece, that Davy Jones ended up confronting someone he deeply cared for or respected because he felt that person betrayed him first. Davy Jones made an enemy of someone very important to him, someone almost divine in his life. It could be his captain, his best friend, or even his beloved, because he felt that person had betrayed him. Although in reality, he was wrong and did not understand the full picture. So I propose this. Was Davy Jones actually Joy Boy? Or perhaps was he someone from the era of Joy Boy who ate the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, the sun god, and was basically a parallel to Luffy? Personally, I don't think so. My theory leads me to believe he was a friend or close nakama of someone like Luffy, possibly Joy Boy himself, rather than being Joy Boy. We have to be careful with our assumptions. We've always thought, oh yes, he was a great pirate from the past. Surely he was a great captain. But what if not? Davy Jones could well have been the first mate of a crew, a member, not the leader. Maybe Davy Jones was part of Joy Boy's crew, even his right-hand man, and not the captain himself. Imagine that Davy Jones received a divine order in a way, an order from his captain, who for him was like a godly figure, especially if that captain had the fruit of the sun god Nika, who was practically a divine envoy, and Davy Jones refused to carry out that order. He fled feeling betrayed or outraged by what he had been asked. In terms of analogy, Davy Jones would be Jonah, his captain. Joy Boy would be the god or the son of God, the champion of the divine will at that time. Joy Boy with the Nika fruit and his mission to free the world would be that sun god giving orders, sometimes, that no one understands. If everything I am saying were true, that pirate in that context is literally participating in a game, a cosmic game of betting against the devil. You are fighting against the devil, and what you risk is your freedom or your soul, your dreams. Once you enter the game, you cannot back out without consequences, because even if you manage to escape with your life, if you abandon, you would have lost the most important thing in your life, your dream, your goal, which in this world is equivalent to losing your soul. The character Zoro himself makes his point of view clear. He would rather die than give up on his dreams. In fact, Eiichiro Oda himself said that Luffy does not kill his enemies because in the world of One Piece, and for Luffy himself, it is considered worse to destroy a person's dreams than to end their life. And that is what Luffy does with his enemies. And I am not just saying this metaphorically, it is explicitly in the rules of the Davy Back fights in One Piece. There are 3 articles that define the defeat in that game. Number 1, any crew member captured during the game can only be recovered by playing again. There is no rescue by brute force. It has to be within the game itself. Number 2, the captured must swear immediate loyalty to the winning captain. That is to say, your will comes to belong to the enemy. And number 3, a stolen flag can never be raised again. Losing your flag is losing your identity as a crew, and they warn that those who do not obey these rules will end up in Davy Jones's locker as a wretch. Translated, the one who breaks the rules loses their pirate soul and becomes cursed. It's not that they die instantly or anything, but it's worse. They are an outcast whose existence no longer has honor or purpose. A lost soul, metaphorically dead in life. It sounds like going to Davy Jones's locker is like condemning yourself to that purgatory we talked about. So what do I think happened to Davy Jones? That he didn't play by the rules. I believe that Davy Jones, after arguing with his captain Joy Boy, or whoever his divine friend was, abandoned the crew in the middle of that game against the devil they had going on. He broke the most sacred rules of pirate camaraderie, and that's why he suffered a fate worse than death. And here comes the craziest part of this theory, so get ready. I have a crazy idea about the identity of Davy Jones that surprisingly fits. What if Davy Jones actually parallels Usopp? Yes, you heard right. Our Usopp, the sniper of the Straw Hats. Before you say, what? Let me explain the parallel calmly, because I know at first it may sound absurd, but it fits incredibly well. Let's go back for a moment to the Water 7 saga. Think about Usopp's story during Water 7 and Enies lobby, and compare it with Jonah's. Usopp received an order from his captain, Luffy, who happens to be the bearer of the power of the sun god Nika, future king of the pirates. And basically, Luffy is the divine figure at sea in the current era. That order was to abandon his dear friend, the ship going Mary, which was unfortunately destined to die, to stop functioning. After all it had endured, and he decided they should let the Mary go, give it a proper funeral, and get a new ship. Usopp did not understand or accept that order. It hurt him deeply. He was furious, afraid to let go of the ship that represented the crew's friendship. He thought Luffy was wrong, that he was betraying the Mary. What did Usopp do? He challenged his captain. He had a serious fight with Luffy, even left the crew and ran away, separated from them. This is the equivalent of Jonah saying no to God and escaping on a ship. Usopp, angry and hurt, went off on his own. In that fight in Water 7, Usopp ended up saying very harsh things to Luffy, implying that Luffy was irresponsible, a fool for discarding the Mary, almost calling him a coward or heartless, similar to how the people of Wano called Oden a fool for not fighting. Usopp was so blinded by anger and fear that he practically treated Luffy as if he were the villain, the devil in that situation. Remember a brutal phrase from Usopp during his duel with Luffy: "Go ahead, try to kill me. I will beat you at your own game. I have already figured out how to take you down." At that moment, Usopp, our favorite liar, was taking on the role of challenger, as if Luffy were the enemy to defeat, all because he couldn't stand the decision his captain had made. And what happened? Usopp lost that fight because no matter how brave he was standing up to Luffy, we all knew deep down that he couldn't win, especially not against his captain. Luffy defeated him, and notice, Luffy didn't finish him off or anything, he just let him go. After the fight, Usopp was completely alone. He decided not to return to the crew out of wounded pride. That Usopp we knew metaphorically died of shame and pain, and in his place, Sogeking was born as he put on a mask and pretended to be someone else. This is analogous to Jonah sinking into the sea and being swallowed by the whale. Usopp fell into a hole of loneliness and despair, a personal purgatory where he was neither with his friends nor following his dreams. He was on standby with a false identity, licking his wounds. He was neither alive nor dead in terms of his dream of being a pirate. During that time, Usopp reflected and thought about what he really wanted, about what he had done wrong. He gradually realized that his fear and wounded pride had led him to act that way. And just like Jonah prayed and repented in the belly of the whale, Usopp finally accepted in his heart that Luffy was right. The Going Merry had completed its cycle, and it was right to let it go with dignity. So Jonah ended up obeying God and went to the Wicked City to fulfill his mission. He helped Luffy rescue Robin at Enies Lobby. He traveled to the Wicked City of Justice with his god Luffy by his side to save someone many considered an evil person, Nico Robin, who was accused of being a demon by the world government. And after that adventure, Usopp finally let go of the Mary in peace. He cried, apologized to the ship and his companions for his attitude, and also asked to forgive Luffy for having doubted him. Jonas betrayed God, but then repented. Usopp betrayed Luffy, but then asked for forgiveness and rejoined the group. There's even a brilliant final detail. We all know that Usopp's lies tend to come true. It's almost a running joke in One Piece. Usopp, in a way, is a liar whose unintended prophecies end up happening. And who was Jonah in the Bible? A prophet, a somewhat rebellious one, yes, but a prophet nonetheless. In Water 7, Usopp told a big lie by pretending to be Sogeking, and that lie ended up becoming partly true. He became a hero for an entire island. Usopp has always had that aura of the liar who unintentionally tells the truth. Usopp is literally a prophet, just like Jonah was. Do you see where I'm going? For a theory that relies more on interpretations than concrete data, this is quite solid and consistent. Oda often takes mythological or historical inspirations and creatively remixes them. And I think we have identified a very strong pattern here. Usopp's story in Water 7 is an almost exact mirror of Jonah's story. Too many coincidences to ignore. It is very possible that in the story of the Greater Past, the Void Century, or others, something similar happened with Joy Boy, the Luffy of the past. And then, if Oda already narrated that dynamic in a microcosm with Usopp and Luffy, it is very possible that the story of the Greater Past, the Void Century, or even before, something similar happened with Joy Boy, who would be the Luffy of the past, and also with Davy Jones, who would be the Usopp of the past. Notice Water 7. Usopp was not the captain, he was a crew member. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones was originally also a crew member serving the goddess Calypso. He was not always his own boss at the beginning. Jonah obviously was a simple man in the service of God. Everything points to Davy Jones in One Piece probably not being the legendary captain of Joy Boy, but his nakama, his friend, his follower, who lost faith in him at a critical moment. And there are more clues within One Piece that reinforce that idea. Do you remember Loki from Elbaf and the recent story? Loki is that giant prince who, according to Big Mom, was going to marry Lola, but the important thing is his relationship with Rox. Loki is devoted to Rox D. Xebec. Well, during the Elbaf arc, Loki offers Luffy a deal and basically says, "If you help me free myself, I will grant you what you desire most." Loki presents himself almost like a tempting devil, promising to fulfill the hero's wish in exchange for freedom. Obviously, Luffy ignores the deal, but what does Loki behaving like this make us think of? A lying demon, the devil offering a pact, and in fact, the character of Loki in Norse mythology is the quintessential trickster god. It turns out that Loki has something in common with Usopp, and that is that both are great liars. Usopp is the god Usopp of creative lying, and Loki is an expert at lying. It could even be argued that Rox D. Xebec was also a liar, or at least someone who hid his true intentions. There is a certain air of dishonesty in his character that we still do not understand. Was he really the monster they portray, or did he have a hidden good side? Did he deceive his crew or his enemies? Blackbeard, whom we could see as the heir to Rox's legacy, is also extremely deceitful. He has betrayed practically everyone, has multiple personalities according to some, and seems like a pattern. The disciples of the legacy of Davy Jones, Rox, Blackbeard, Loki, share the characteristic of using lies as a tool. And Usopp, our Jonah avatar, is the benevolent liar. Let's recap this hypothetically reconstructed story of Davy Jones in One Piece by combining everything discussed. Davy Jones was a crew member of a great character. Let's call him Joy Boy to simplify it. A character parallel to Luffy in the ancient era could be the Joy Boy of the Void Century, or even earlier, if we consider that history is cyclical and that there have been several worlds. But to avoid confusion, let's say that Davy Jones sailed with Joy Boy about 800-900 years ago. Joy Boy, that ancient Luffy, and Davy Jones had a very strong disagreement. Joy Boy asked Davy Jones to do something that Davy considered wrong or intolerable. Maybe Joy Boy decided not to fight against a certain evil enemy at a given moment, for reasons only he understood, and Davy Jones interpreted it as cowardice or betrayal. This could reflect Oven's decision not to fight against Kaido at the beginning. Decisions that others did not understand and were judged poorly. Let's give a hypothetical example. Suppose Joy Boy encountered an incarnation of evil. Let's call it a Sea Devil, perhaps the predecessor of Emu. And for whatever reason, Joy Boy decided not to fight him directly at that moment. Perhaps Joy Boy saw that he could not win at that instant without catastrophic consequences. Or maybe he trusted in a long-term plan. Davy Jones, seeing his captain yield or not act against that great evil, would become enraged. For Davy Jones, who was possibly brave but fearful of losing his purpose, that would be unforgivable. Davy might have thought, why, if we have the power of the Sun God on our side, don't we destroy that evil once and for all? Why does Joy Boy hold back? Is he afraid? Is he betraying us? Davy Jones decides that if Joy Boy, his captain, is not going to defeat the devil, then he will do it himself. He abandons Joy Boy's crew, literally throws himself overboard from their shared destiny, separates, and sets out on his own to hunt the devil. This would be the echo of Usopp leaving Luffy behind to fight alone for the Merry, or of Jonah fleeing to avoid fulfilling the mission he disagreed with. Now, Davy finds himself alone, but determined. He recruits a massive crew of perhaps 10,000 men. Does the number sound familiar? Usopp always fantasized about having 8,000 followers. In Dressrosa, he ended up leading thousands unintentionally, and out of nowhere became the leader of hundreds of criminals. Davy Jones, in a Usopp buggy godlike manner, could have gathered an army of pirates by promising them immense gold with his lying tongue. He probably told them exaggerated stories, mixing truths and lies, presenting himself as a messiah who would bring true freedom. All of this by defeating the demon that Joy Boy or others did not dare to face. In other words, Davy Jones became a sort of false god to his followers. For his crew, Davy was the great figure to worship. Let's remember that Rox worshipped Davy Jones, which implies that Davy Jones cultivated something like a cult of personality. Important difference. Joy Boy's crew followed Joy Boy for his camaraderie, for shared ideals, but none worshipped him as a god. Each had their own dreams, just like the Straw Hats with Luffy. In contrast, Davy Jones's crew probably idolized him fanatically, as if he were infallible. This is similar to what happens with Buggy in the current story. His men see him as almost divine due to misunderstandings and coincidences. Davy Jones might have been like that, a great fraud with accidental charisma who surrounded himself with pirates who acclaimed him without knowing that in reality, he was not as strong as the legend said. With this great army, Davy Jones is going to confront the devil in person. And here I imagine an epic scene, Davy Jones challenging the devil of the sea, whether it's Immu or the possessor of Immu's power at that moment, to an all-or-nothing game, possibly wagering his own soul. A Davy backfight on an exaggerated level, but here is the supreme irony. Davy Jones, despite his entourage of 10,000 men, turns out to be a fraud in terms of real power compared to the devil. His followers gradually realize that their leader is not that invincible warrior they believed, and when they see that the duel is lost, they betray and abandon him. Imagine thousands of pirates deserting or turning their backs on him at the crucial moment. Just like Rox's crew apparently abandoned him at God Valley, Davy Jones is left completely alone facing the devil and feels an overwhelming terror for the first time. Davy Jones panics. The great taboo for a pirate is to turn his back in the final battle, but Davy can't help it. He tries to flee, break the duel, cheat to save his life, and that desperate act breaks the rules of the sacred game he had started. That's where the curse comes in. Cheating or fleeing in the game against the devil, Davy Jones automatically loses what he wagered, his soul, to Davy Jones's locker, which ironically bears his name. The devil captures his soul, his essence, and Davy Jones receives a curse. That curse is, as we said, being turned into an immortal demon in the service of the devil. The devil basically says to him, "You wanted to be a fearless warrior? Very well, I grant you your wish in my own way." And Davy Jones transforms into a demonic, immortal, powerful being, literally heartless, incapable of love or fear, because he no longer has anything to protect. He lost everything. His crew, his friends, his very soul. Davy Jones wanted to feel no fear. He wanted to be strong. Now, as a demon, he feels no fear because he also feels no love or attachments. Paradoxically, he became what he always wanted to be, a warrior invulnerable to fear, but at the cost of losing everything that made him human. I must say that the image of Davy Jones transforming into a demon fits perfectly with what Robin said, cursed by a demon, and with what we saw in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy tearing out his heart and becoming a monster. It also reminds me of what happened to Doribroggi in the mythology of Elbaf within One Piece, and it's that they said they turned into demons because they fought eternally, although that was more of a sailor's rumor. Even in Elbaf, where we have seen the Sacred Knights, they could be cursed people turned into immortal demons, and the truth is that it really seems that way. The thing is, being a demon is contagious in a certain way. A demon can create more demons because it corrupts others. Davy Jones, already transformed into the Devil's Champion, could have had the power to turn his most loyal followers into demonic creatures as well, spreading the curse. Maybe that's where the first devilfish or other strange races came from. Now let's return to Joy Boy, the friendly captain that Davy left. Joy Boy eventually finds out what happened. His former Nakama, Davy Jones, has been cursed, turned into a demon, and is wreaking havoc under the Devil's orders. Joy Boy, true to his principles, wants to save his friend even though his friend has betrayed him. Joy Boy has two options. 1, kill Davy Jones, end the demon, and 2, try to recover Davy Jones's soul from the Devil's locker. Killing him would be terribly difficult emotionally because Davy Jones was his friend, his nakama. Think about Luffy. Do you think Luffy could kill Usopp even if Usopp turned evil? It would be devastating, so it is assumed that Joy Boy prefers to use option B, rescuing Davy Jones's soul. And how do you recover a lost Nakama? Exactly, by playing again according to the rules. You have to re-enter the game against the devil and win this time. This is precisely one of the rules of the Davy backfights. The only way to recover a lost comrade is to play and win. So I imagine that Joy Boy, far from giving up, decides that even though he cannot now, at some point he will challenge the devil in his game again to save Davy Jones. And I think that intention is so significant that it almost becomes a promise that transcends time. Here is a metaphorical element in One Piece. Dreams are equivalent to the soul. Recovering our dreams from the devil is a recurring theme. For example, in Thriller Bark with the Stolen Shadows, or in Whole Cake with Big Mom stealing Lifetime in exchange for security. Luffy, during Whole Cake Island, decides not to fight Big Mom head on because his priority is to properly get Sanji back, to wait, to trust that his Nakama is ready to return. In the same way, Joy Boy might choose a long-term plan to recover Davy Jones without sacrificing him. Now let's imagine that everything we are talking about happened in the Void Century 900 years ago. We know that somehow Joy Boy failed in his original mission as he left an apology message on the Poneglyphs. I am inclined to think that Joy Boy did not manage to save Davy Jones at that time. He might have tried, but the circumstances did not allow it. In fact, Joy Boy might have had to choose between defeating the devil, Imu, or saving Davy Jones. And as we speculated before, perhaps defeating the devil by brute force would not return Davy's soul. On the contrary, it could destroy it forever. Like with Mariah, if you kill the one who has the shadows might not return. Joy Boy, facing that impossible situation, might have thought, if I kill Imu now, I may never recover my friend's soul. But if I leave Imu alive, my friend remains cursed and the world is in danger. What do I do? A very tragic choice, but what do we know about Joy Boy? That he never gave up on his dream, and that in the face of failure, he decided to pass on his will to the future. I think Joy Boy chose an unexpected option. He defeated Davy Jones, incapacitated him without killing him, and hid him. Yes, similar to what Shanks did with Loki, whom we know he defeated but did not kill. Instead, he imprisoned him. And I imagine Joy Boy facing Davy Jones, an emotional duel like Luffy versus Usopp. Joy Boy defeats Davy Jones in combat, but he doesn't have the heart to kill him. Instead, he locks him away in some secret and safe place where Imu, the devil, cannot easily find him. Maybe he seals him in some place in the deep sea or inside some structure, perhaps in Laugh Tale itself or in the secret sea beneath the Reverse Mountain. Let's speculate. He might have locked him in an inaccessible place, trusting that in the future someone worthy will find him and be able to free him in the right way. Joy Boy, having to do this and not being able to truly free his friend, feels that he has failed his dream. Remember the phrase, the day Joy Boy could not save someone was the day Joy Boy could no longer fulfill his dream. That's why Joy Boy wrote the letter of apology on the poneglyph of the island, because he couldn't completely free the world, he couldn't save all his friends. Joy Boy then leaves his treasure behind, and what is Joy Boy's most precious treasure? Probably his crew, his friends, and among them, Davy Jones was very special, so it is very possible that part of the One Piece treasure is, in fact, Davy Jones himself, or something related to him. Then we arrive at the present, the third world, the era of Luffy. Luffy, as the heir to Joy Boy's will not only defeat the devil Imu, but his final mission will also be to save him. How so? Well, you see, now we will delve into an even more philosophical aspect of the theory. One Piece, the story, at its core, is not simply about the good defeating the bad. It has increasingly taken shape as a story about breaking the cycle of hatred and saving the world completely without leaving loose ends of resentment. And it is possible that this means that, in the end, Luffy not only defeats Imu, the devil, but also saves him from his hatred and loneliness. Jonah in the Bible had much in common with Lucifer, yes, the fallen angel. Jonah was a servant of God who rebelled, and Lucifer was an angel of God who rebelled out of pride. In a way, Jonah, and by extension Davy Jones, represent that rebel who, out of pride and misunderstanding, became an adversary of God. Lucifer, according to tradition, was filled with pride and wanted to be above God, which fits with the ambition of certain characters. Perhaps Imu himself, who is literally above the world in Mary Geoise and with a divine complex. The story of One Piece, in my opinion, is about achieving the impossible, and what could be more impossible than creating a world where everyone can achieve their dreams and no one suffers? It sounds utopian and unattainable. Many villains in One Piece, Crocodile, Doflamingo, Kaido, have that cynical view that achieving a just world is impossible. Even characters like Akainu believe that only through strict control can peace be maintained, sacrificing individual dreams. But Oda has been showing us that the way to win is not by playing by the same rules of evil. It is not. The strongest imposes their justice, like Akainu, but it is something different. Luffy represents that difference. Luffy gains friends instead of subjugating them, and inspires instead of frightening. So, going back to the metaphor of God against the devil, you can't beat the devil at his own game, because if you do, you become the same as Pirates of the Caribbean taught. Each side that took power became the new tyrant. Luffy cannot become the kind of person who imposes his dream by killing those who oppose him, because then he stops being Luffy. That's why I believe the ultimate goal is not to defeat the devil Imu by destroying him, but to save him. But what does it mean to save the devil? Well, to redeem the adversary, to convince the enemy that they were wrong, and bring them out of their darkness. Think about this. Oda often redeems evil characters or gives them nuances. An example would be the racist fishmen who changed thanks to Otohime. Perhaps Imu cannot be redeemed 100%, but his champion, Davy Jones, might be. And if you manage to save the Devil's champion, that is, bring Davy Jones back to humanity, you would be showing the Devil himself that his cause was wrong. Ultimately, this story might be about how everyone deserves to be saved, even those who have fallen into darkness. Luffy has never killed his enemies. He breaks their will, makes them see their mistakes through sheer force, but he makes them reconsider to some extent. And to defeat the Devil of One Piece, Emu, Luffy will probably need everyone's help. No one can do it alone, not even God. One Piece has always been about friendship, cooperation, and perhaps the great irony is that the way to defeat Emu is not by giving him a punch stronger than the one Joy Boy gave him 800 years ago, but by convincing him of something. What could that something be? Well, it could precisely be showing him that his dream can also be fulfilled in a way. Do it correctly. If Emu is indeed that Usopp from the first world we speculated about, an ancient enemy betrayed who wants to undo the world out of pain, then perhaps Emu also has a deep dream of recovering something lost, and could be the one to make the Devil laugh. That is, break M's wall of hatred, making him see the light. Yes, it sounds cheesy, but it fits with the recurring idea of inherited will, and we will meet again and the dawn will come. In concrete terms, I think Luffy and his allies will end up confronting Emu and his Shadow Army in the end, and in that climax it is very possible that Davy Jones himself will appear. Emu might try to use Davy Jones, if somehow recaptured, as a false deity to deceive the world or to fight. Perhaps Emu has been keeping the legend of Davy Jones alive as a destructive god in which part of the world believes. And all this would be to manipulate the masses. Remember in the buff, the doubt there was about Nika, whether he was a god of laughter, a warrior god, or what. Perhaps Emu has promoted the worship of a vengeful sun god, who is actually Davy Jones, to counter the worship of the liberating sun god, the ancient Joy Boy or Nika, but Emu has the hat, not the man. This suggests that Davy Jones is currently beyond Emu's reach. Where? It could be in Laugh Tale itself. Imagine that the final treasure includes freeing an ancient prisoner, Davy Jones, and learning the truth. I think that Joy Boy might have left Davy Jones safeguarded on the final island, Laugh Tale, which is literally a tale of laughter. Roger laughed upon discovering the story, so maybe they saw that the whole cycle was very ironic. Perhaps they laughed upon understanding that Laugh Tale literally involved making someone who hasn't laughed in centuries laugh, the very demon Davy Jones, or Emu himself. Roger and his crew arrived too early. They couldn't do anything about it. They just laughed, took note, and left. That's why Roger called that place the Story of Laughter, because there's a cosmic plan to provoke the most impossible laughter, that of the Devil. I'm speculating a mile a minute, I know, but let me finish the thread. What is Luffy's dream? We know that Luffy has told his Nakamas his hidden dream, and that they all reacted with surprise and smiles. Ace and Sabo heard it as children and laughed. Oda hides that dream from us. My guess is that Luffy's dream is something seemingly silly but immense, like, I want everyone to be free and have fun together in a big worldwide party, something like going around the world with everyone as friends. I don't know, but I've seen popular theories that his dream is to throw the biggest party in history where everyone laughs. I would express it like this: Luffy's dream is to make even the most bitter enemy laugh. Maybe as a child he saw Ace and Sabo so serious and competitive that he said, I will make everyone laugh with something no one imagines. That dream would be passed from Joy Boy to Roger to Luffy. Joy Boy did not kill the enemy because his childhood dream was, one day I will make this enemy, the Devil, truly smile with us. It sounds crazy, yes. It's ridiculous, yes. So ridiculous that it fits with Roger's laughter upon reaching the end. Joy Boy perhaps, instead of killing Emu, wanted to redeem him, and that's why he couldn't fulfill his normal war mission. Roger laughed because he understood the magnitude of Joy Boy's plan. Did this guy really want to do this? How crazy, or what an innocent child. He called it Laugh Tale because of that story destined for a laugh. Then, in the final battle, Luffy will surely release Davy Jones. It could even happen earlier to turn the tables against Emu. Maybe Blackbeard, in his quest for power, will reach the cell first and release Davy Jones, hoping to use him for his own ends. Blackbeard might be the one to release Davy Jones, believing he will gain a demonic ally or simply to cause chaos. Or perhaps Luffy will release him, understanding that it is the right thing to do, even knowing it is danger. Imagine the situation. Someone says, don't release him, Luffy. That guy will destroy the world if you do. And Luffy replying something like, chaining someone forever. I don't like that at all. If he's really that bad, then I'll see how to defeat him later, but I don't plan to leave anyone locked up just out of fear, because Luffy believes in absolute freedom. He did it with Boa Hancock, whom he didn't hand over, with Law, who broke the Shichibukai system, with the prisoners of Impel Down. He always frees people, even if they can be dangerous, because he trusts in facing the consequences. So Luffy would free Davy Jones just like with Loki, who was also chained, and he would do it without hesitation for the simple principle of, if he really is that troublesome, then I'll deal with him when the time comes. That is Luffy's mentality. Once free, Davy Jones would probably still be under the demonic curse, resentful. He could be a great temporary antagonist, a former hero turned into a destructive demon, maybe Davy Jones, the demon and Blackbeard ally out of convenience, or Imu controls him mentally from a distance, who knows. The final battle could be chaos with multiple fronts. Luffy allies against Imu and his forces, against Blackbeard, and in the middle, Demon Davy Jones wreaking havoc. But the key to winning, as we have said, will not only be hitting harder, but breaking the cycle. How is it broken? By connecting with the enemy on a human level. Joy Boy in the past couldn't kill his treasure. Luffy couldn't kill Usopp if he were possessed either. He would try to save him. Something like that would surely happen. Maybe the current Usopp has to face his own ultimate fear and play a critical role. Many believe that Usopp could temporarily die fulfilling his lie. He said in Thriller Bark, "I died, and you know." And in Pirates of the Caribbean, to free Davy Jones in the end, what they do is kill him. Maybe in One Piece, Usopp would have a sacrificial moment, meaning he doesn't really die, but he dies for a while. It could be that to break Davy Jones's curse, someone has to offer their life or something symbolic. It would be very powerful if Usopp were the one to voluntarily sacrifice his life so that Luffy can reach Emu or to save someone else. It would be the culmination of his dream to be the bravest. Imagine Usopp sacrificing himself, proving to Davy Jones, the great original lying demon, that the gods, Luffy in this case, truly value their friends to the death. Or to Imu, that first Usopp shows that true friendship exists. I'm going off on future tangents, so I'm returning to the overall structure. Luffy in the end is going to achieve what Joy Boy could not, recover the soul of Davy Jones. This would surely mean also destroying all the devil fruits, freeing all those trapped souls, and possibly destroying the eternal flame that caused all the imbalance, which would be like the source of energy or magic that corrupted the natural cycle, perhaps an artifact hidden in the planet's core, the famous Forbidden Sun mentioned in ancient texts. That is, what could be the Mother Flame, but from the Void Century. Remember, a theory within this same story speculates that the current world is built on another, and that the Red Line is like the keel that keeps the world afloat, separated from the underworld. If the Red Line is recklessly destroyed, it would be a cataclysm that would unite the seas, which would be good, but it could sink the world, which would be bad. Many good characters want to destroy the Red Line, Shoji, the Giants, and all this is to unite the world and fulfill the prophecy of the All Blue. It's like a narrative mandate that it must be destroyed. But here the theory also proposes, what if the Red Line is also what keeps Hell sealed below? If Imu precisely wants to destroy the Red Line, it might not be to unite the world fraternally, but to sink everything into hell. Maybe Imu believes that by returning everything to the Red Sea, they will reunite with their deceased loved ones or something like that. It would be a great twist if Imu, whom we all believe to be a defender of the status quo, actually wants to destroy the current world for something personal. Then Luffy would have to make difficult decisions. Destroy the Red Line to fulfill everyone's dream? Have a unified sea? But if he destroys it, he would unleash the infernal chaos below. He might handle it. But the story of One Piece is about taking those risks for dreams, entering the belly of the whale, that is facing that enormous challenge even if it might destroy you. Luffy is not afraid of that leap of faith. He will bring the dawn and tear down the Red Line, I am almost sure, because it is necessary for the era of unification. Maybe that will be the final battle. Luffy against Imu, literally at the center of the world, in the hell of the Red Sea, with the eternal flame burning there. Perhaps Imu wants to use Pluton or something to break the last barrier. The base of the Red Line, let's imagine. And Luffy decides that he will do it his way, and in the end, by destroying that eternal flame, all the devil fruits in the world stop working, and release the accumulated souls. This would be a crazy ending where suddenly all the users lose their powers because Luffy freed the souls from before, returning humanity to its natural state. It could be that Davy Jones, the demon, regains his humanity at that moment when his soul returns. Imagine that scene. Luffy manages to destroy the source. Demon Davy Jones staggers, a light comes out of his chest, and finally his soul or heart returns. He becomes himself again after centuries. And there, maybe Luffy or someone else must sacrifice themselves to stop Imu. But by then, Davy Jones would be free from the curse. Ultimately, Luffy would have fulfilled Joy Boy's dream, saving both his friends, Sanji, Robin, and so on, as he did during his journey, and even the lost friend from the past, Davy Jones, and even the original enemy in a certain sense. The "all the broken pieces will become one" could refer to all wills and souls finally resting together. Those from the first world, second world, and third would reunite. There might even be reunions of spirits. The shadow of Joy Boy greeting the soul of his old friend David. It would be an emotional ending. I know all this sounds huge, maybe it's too convoluted, but hey, it's One Piece. It's huge and convoluted if you think about it. And to me at least, this story seems worthy of One Piece, with all its epic scale, its laughter, its philosophical twists, and its heart. I have unleashed a barrage of theories one after another, and I understand if some parts seem too much to digest. Oda will obviously have to package all this simply for the general audience when the end comes, but I think the central message would be something like, it's not just about defeating evil, but about breaking the cycle of hatred, saving even those who seemed irredeemable, fulfilling everyone's dreams, not just a few. This would be the One Piece in a conceptual sense, the total unity of everyone laughing under the same free sky. To summarize a bit, I conceive the One Piece literally as everything. That is, the collection of all good things, the dreams of each character, complete freedom, shared joy, the unified history. All of that is the One Piece. But within the story, what matters is what the One Piece means to Luffy, because that is the interpretation that will count in the end. If for Luffy, One Piece is traveling around the world in an eternal banquet with all his friends and rivals, then that is what it will be. And that absurd dream is inherited. Many have had it. Roger, Joy Boy. I firmly believe that Luffy's dream is to make every being in the world laugh, even his enemies, whether at a party or an unprecedented event. A dream so childlike and innocent that Ace and Sabo laughed upon hearing it, that the Straw Hats reacted with surprise but understood it, and that Roger himself surely shared, because otherwise he wouldn't have laughed upon reaching Laugh Tale. Maybe he gave a message from Joy Boy like, I hope you can make everyone laugh someday, even that grumpy king of the world. Roger called the last point Laugh Tale because he understood that everything revolved around a final laugh, the hardest laugh to achieve. And going back to Davy Jones, just to wrap up, I think it is very likely that Davy Jones, the historical character from One Piece, will appear in some way in the final plot. He will surely be released by Blackbeard, Luffy, or one of these two, and will play a very important role, either as a tremendous danger or as an unexpected ally. But definitely, I bet that Davy Jones will be freed from his curse in the end. Maybe Luffy will free him, or perhaps it will be Blackbeard trying to use him and Luffy will free him from control. Luffy believes in freedom, so seeing someone chained against their own will, whether it's Davy Jones or even Loki, whom he just freed, he won't like it at all. Even if they say to him, don't do it because it will destroy the world, Luffy would think, if it really is that bad, when he is free and wants to do evil, I will stop him myself, but I will not leave him chained out of fear. That is the essence of Luffy, and I bet Oda will make that decision of faith by Luffy the right one, because in the end, Luffy will find a way to stop any threat without sacrificing his principles. Possibly Luffy will need the help of many to achieve all this. Maybe Brooks Music and the crew wanted to make the rest laugh. Perhaps Shanks and others will participate in the final battle against Blackbeard. We have mentioned many elements. Maybe Laugh Tale is inside a colossal sleeping whale. Imagine, there are theories that the final island could be a living being. Blackbeard might become obsessed with hunting that whale, while Luffy, on the other hand, would conquer it with laughter and music, with Binks' sake to open the route perhaps? Everything fits thematically. The world building of One Piece is truly incredible. Eiichiro Oda has introduced us to many characters, each with a different view of the world and unique convictions and motivations. This causes the Straw Hats to constantly encounter individuals whose ideals clash with theirs. In each story arc, we have a different enemy to defeat, from tyrannical pirates to corrupt governments, which makes the series always feel very lively and exciting. But we must not forget that, as rich as the setting is, One Piece is not a real world, but a shonen manga written by Eiichiro Oda. And being a shonen, there are certain narrative elements that are inevitable. In particular, there is always a final villain to face in the final stretch of the work. Since the beginning of One Piece, Oda has both followed and subverted genre conventions. We have seen Luffy and his crew defeat countless villains, each with their own goals. Arlong and his supremacism against humans, Crocodile and his political ambition in Alabasta, Enel, self-proclaimed god of Scipioea, Doflamingo tyrannizing Dressrosa, Kaido seeking an epic war, and many others like them. Each enemy has been different, with ideals opposed to Luffy's, and their downfall has propelled the hero's journey. However, being such an extensive work, it is easy to forget that it follows certain very basic narrative rules of shonen. No matter how different or special One Piece is, there are things that are destined to happen, especially to close the cycle of the story, and among those things is what is commonly referred to as the final villain. In classic adventure and action stories, especially in shonen manga, there is usually a definitive antagonistic force that awaits the protagonist at the end of the journey. One Piece is no exception. No matter how unpredictable its world is, it is natural to expect an epic final battle against an enemy that surpasses all previous ones. That final force that surpasses everything seen so far is what the protagonists must defeat to complete their adventure and fulfill their dreams. Monkey D. Luffy, to become the king of the pirates and free the world, will eventually have to face and defeat this supreme enemy. Over the years, there have been many theories about who that final villain in One Piece would be, and the range of characters is very wide, so there is no shortage of candidates. However, most fans have divided into two main camps in this debate, and one of those camps covers perhaps 70% or more of the speculations. In other words, for many readers, the final villain is, quote, quite predictable. Or at least that's what Oda has made us believe so far. And who is that obvious candidate? Well, it's Imu, the mysterious figure in the shadows of the world government. Ever since being briefly introduced during the Reverie, Imu is shaping up to be a great hidden enemy, possibly the true king of the world in the shadows. In fact, if you ask most fans, they are very clear that Imu will occupy the empty throne as the ultimate villain at the end of the story. And it's not a random idea. There are good reasons within the manga that point to this. But before we move forward with our alternative theory, it's worth reviewing why Imu seems to be the final villain according to most. Let's look point by point at the reasons that have led the public to believe that Imu will be the final enemy. First of all, he is the highest authority in the world. Imu has turned out to be the person with the greatest authority in the entire world government and therefore in the entire world. The very 5 elders of the Gorosei serve him and kneel before him, which means that Imu secretly occupies the empty throne. Symbolically, this places him at the absolute pinnacle of governmental power in One Piece, reflecting the oppressive control of the world government over the world. A final villain who is literally above all other power structures sounds logical. Then we have his connection with the Void Century and Joy Boy. And everything indicates that Imu has been alive for 800 years or more, that he was present in the mysterious Void Century, and it has been strongly suggested that Imu is actually Saint Imu of the Nerona family, one of the original founders of the world government 8 centuries ago. It is theorized that he obtained eternal youth through the operation of the Ope no Mi, which would explain why he continues to rule after so many generations. And this implies that Imu was there during the War of the Void Century, facing Joy Boy and the Ancient Kingdom. In other words, Imu already acted as the great enemy of the Will of D in the past, the will that Luffy himself carries today, and it would be poetic for him to continue being so in the present. Another reason is that we have seen it foreshadow an epic final war, as Imu himself has hinted at being the final hurdle to overcome. He has spoken several times about that great war that is coming, mentioning that this conflict will inevitably occur, and that a certain race, the Giants of Elbaf, will be decisive in determining the victor. Imu shows a lot of interest in the Giants, as he ordered the Divine Knights to reach Elbaf as soon as possible, and has even participated personally, possessing Gumko in an attack on this nation, seeking for the Giants to be on their side in the war, or not exist at all. And if the antagonist is concerned about securing the alliance of the most powerful warrior race, it's because they know that in the final battle, their enemies could have them as allies. All this paints Imu as the axis of the culminating war. Another point in favor of Imu as the final villain is that we know practically nothing about him or her. We do not know their face, their true identity, since it could be an alias or a title. We do not know their exact origin or what kind of being they are. We barely know that they are supposed to wear some kind of crown or something like that and sit on the empty throne. We are unaware of their powers. Do they have a devil fruit? Is it a divine ability? Are they even human? This aura of mystery often surrounds the ultimate enemy in many stories. keeping readers intrigued until the climax. Furthermore, although in recent chapters the name Nerona Imu was mentioned, associating it with a member of the Founders, it has not been specifically confirmed that Imu is Nerona Imu. And knowing how One Piece is and how Oda is, we cannot trust anything 100% until it is clearly revealed. But that lack of information fits with the idea of a secret final villain who would be revealed at the last moment. Then we have seen that Imu is the author of never before seen atrocities. Imu has already demonstrated terrifying power, even with brief appearances. He was responsible for the annihilation of Lulusia, erasing an entire kingdom from the map in an instant. He wields ancient artifacts or abilities capable of unleashing destruction on a national scale. He has also shown strange abilities like controlling the Five Elders and transforming them into some kind of strange creatures, something like demonic creatures that serve to fight on his behalf. Apart from the already famous Domi Reversi, which seems to turn anyone into a demonic entity under Imu's control. Imu has at his disposal both the military power of the world government and his own almost divine or infernal powers. An enemy with such an arsenal naturally aims to be the final challenge for Luffy. With reasons like this, it's no wonder that approximately 70% or more of the community thinks that Imu will be the final villain of One Piece. It's, let's say, the obvious. All the recent focus of the story points towards him. Oda has hinted at it with these details, and it seems the logical conclusion: Imu is the supreme leader behind the oppression of the world government. Then Luffy will have to defeat him to free the world. And that's it. Case closed, right? Well, what if I told you that all this we just summarized might be nothing more than part of Eiichiro Oda's master plan? What if Imu is actually a smokescreen meant to mislead the fans? Eiichiro Oda, within the classic nature of such a long manga, always tries to surprise the viewer. He has mentioned on more than one occasion that he does not like it when fan theories correctly predict the twists he has planned. In fact, he said that if they guessed what it was, for example the One Piece, he would completely change what it is. Oda is famous for planting false clues and making shocking revelations that no one saw coming. In the case of the final battle, Oda knows that the expectations are enormous, after more than 25 years of history and over 1,000 chapters. He himself has spoken about the speculated final war in the work, confirming that it will happen, and he literally said some time ago, Marineford will look like a cute war next to what's coming. That is to say, the Marineford War, which until now has been the most brutal conflict shown with the death of Ace and Whitebeard, will seem very small compared to the climax of One Piece. With those statements, Oda guarantees us a colossal ending. Now then, if Imu were simply the final villain, just as we all believe, wouldn't it be too obvious for Oda's standards? Let's think, One Piece has over 1,000 chapters and more than 25 years of publication. Is the final boss really going to be someone Oda introduced to us in chapter 906 and that many fans assumed from that moment? It would be very strange if in such a long-running story, the final villain could be predicted so far in advance without any twist, right? Oda enjoys subverting our expectations. If he already confirmed that there will be a great final war and is making us think that Imu is the ultimate rival, one starts to suspect, would he really let us see the final villain coming in such an obvious way? If most already take it for granted, maybe Oda is preparing a surprise. As a creator, Oda would want the final battle to take us by surprise, to blow our minds with an incredible plot twist instead of just giving us the expected. At this point, I must clarify that Imu is not going to be the final villain. At least this is the idea of this theory. In my opinion, Imu is going to turn out to be what I call an object character. That is, a character whose goal is to fulfill a specific function to enhance another or demonstrate something in the story. And rather than being the climax himself, Imu would be a perfect decoy for the fans, presenting himself as the supposed final villain, which will actually give way to the true ultimate enemy of One Piece. And who is that ultimate enemy if it's not Imu? Well, hold on, because it might surprise you. There is no one above Imu or some extraterrestrial god pulled out of nowhere, but rather a character you all know very well for a long time. In fact, it is someone who has been competing with Luffy since before entering the New World, and the final villain will be Davy D. Teach Blackbeard. Yes, I know he is known as Marshall D. Teach Blackbeard, but since we have been told his real last name, I call him Davy D. Teach. It adds an aura. Maybe right now you're thinking this doesn't make sense, that Teach's role is different in the story, but I ask you to listen to everything I have to say because I'm sure that in the end, you'll see things differently. Oda is tricking us all with Imu while quietly preparing Blackbeard for the final strike. At this point in the story, Teach has been discreetly moved away from the main focus. Since the Marineford arc and the time skip, Blackbeard has been operating in the shadows. We don't see his moves in the foreground very often, just glimpses of his actions, his attack on Amazon Lily Island against Boa Hancock, his ambush of Trafalgar Law at sea, and little else. In the current Elbaf arc, the importance of Imu and the world government has been increasing, filling pages with revelations about the world's secrets. While Teach operates behind the scenes, we know he's out there causing trouble, but the manga doesn't highlight it too much. The perception as readers might be that Imu is now the great active villain, and that Teach might have another role or will be an intermediate obstacle. But beware, that perception is exactly what Oda wants us to have. He himself diverts our attention. While we are all amazed by Imu disintegrating islands and the intrigues of the government, Blackbeard has been amassing enormous power without us paying much attention. We know that the threat of Teach exists, but unconsciously we have put it on the back burner because of all the noise surrounding Imu and the elders of the Gorosei. This should already make us doubt, is what is happening really in the story, or is it what Oda wants us to think is happening? Because if one coldly analyzes the current situation of Marshall D. Teach, one will realize that he has everything to be the final villain. Let's review what Blackbeard currently possesses and what he has achieved. Hachinosu Island. Teach took over Hachinosu, the legendary pirate island that was the base of Rox D. Xebec decades ago. It is his territory and headquarters in the New World, a lawless place teeming with pirates. Additionally, Teach has expressed that he wants to turn Hachinosu into an officially recognized kingdom, his own pirate country, to be able to attend the Reverie, the World Meeting of Kings. In fact, he kidnapped Koby precisely to negotiate with the world government for the recognition of Hachinosu as an affiliated nation in exchange for his life. This demonstrates his political ambition. Teach is not just a pirate seeking treasures, he wants to be a king in the world system, and surely something more that we do not know today. He also has a very powerful crew with very strong devil fruits. Blackbeard surrounded himself with the worst criminals from level 6 of Impel Down, whom he recruited after their escape. His 10 Titanic captains, the fleet commanders. It includes monsters like Shiryu of the Rain, former jailer with the Suke no Mi of invisibility, Van Augur, sniper with the Wapu Wapu no Mi of teleportation, Lafitte, hypnosis, and possible fruit. Still to be revealed, Katarina Devon with the Inu Inu no Mi, model QB, capable of taking the form of others. This is important for later. Sanjuan Wolf, a colossal giant with the giant fruit. And he also has Pizarro, Vasco Shot, he has Doc Q with his disease fruit, etc. And several members have stolen powers from others. Shiryu obtained invisibility by taking Absalom's fruit, for example. Additionally, Teach has been gathering an arsenal of fruits and hunts powerful users to take their abilities. His crew has accumulated several strong fruits, and indeed, Blackbeard's crew is one of the most powerful ever seen, full of individuals with lethal powers. Then he also has 3 road pony glyphs in his possession. After the fall of Big Mom and Kaido, the 4 road pony glyphs, the red stones that point the way to Laugh Tale, were in play. Teach ambushed Trafalgar Law at sea and defeated him, stealing the rubbings of the road pony glyphs that Law had. Let's remember that Law had obtained copies of at least 3 of these stones, those from Wano, Zoo, and Whole Cake during the alliance against Kaido and Big Mom. This means that currently Blackbeard possesses 3 of the 4 road poneglyphs, which are necessary to go to Laugh Tale. He only lacks 1, the lost poneglyph, whose location no one knows for sure. Having the location of Laugh Tale almost within reach is a critical ingredient. It brings Teach closer to fulfilling the dream of becoming the king of the pirates before Luffy. He also has Charlotte Pudding captured. Teach attacked Big Mom's territory after Wano and kidnapped Charlotte Pudding, Big Mom's daughter, who belongs to the Three-Eye tribe. Big Mom mentioned that she believed Pudding, upon awakening the power of her third eye, could read the poneglyphs, a skill only possessed by the Kozuki clan in Wano and currently by Nico Robin. If Teach holds Pudding, it is likely for this reason, either to force her to read the road poneglyphs for him, or to extract memories with her Memo no Mai. This gives Teach an alternative method to decipher the path to Laugh Tale. Even without Robin, he also has Monkey D. Garp as a hostage. In a bold move, Blackbeard managed to capture none other than the hero of the Navy, Monkey D. Garp, Luffy's grandfather. During the Battle of Hachinosu, Garp infiltrated to rescue Kobe and caused havoc. But finally, Teach's crew managed to capture Garp and currently have him imprisoned. This is a huge prize. Garp is a symbol of the Navy. Having him captive could serve Teach as a bargaining chip. It is speculated that Blackbeard might try to exchange Garp for something very valuable. For example, the official recognition of Hachinosu, or for world government technology. In any case, it is a move that personally hurts Luffy as well, since Garp is his beloved grandfather. He also has the location of 2 ancient weapons. Another subtle detail is that Teach could have very easy access to the location of at least 2 ancient weapons. How? Well, thanks to the mysterious Caribou. Caribou overheard conversations about Poseidon Shirahoshi on Fishman Island and about Pluton in Wano, and in recent chapters, he said he had to tell that information to a certain person. And although it is true that he has not revealed who that person is, it is implied that he is referring to Blackbeard, since he said he admired this person and asked Katarina Devon and Van Augur to take him to him because he had information to give him. If Caribou revealed those secrets to Teach's people, then Blackbeard knows that Shirahoshi is Poseidon, a weapon capable of controlling the Sea Kings, and that Pluton lies in Wano. Even without having them physically, that information is too powerful. And coincidentally, after Wano, we saw Teach attack key territories, like Hancock's Island, where there might be clues about Uranus, or we also saw him moving after the road poneglyphs. It is possible that he is gathering resources to also obtain the ancient weapons. He also possesses 2 devil fruits at the same time. This point is implied, but it remains very important. The only human known today capable of possessing 2 devil fruit powers at the same time. He stole the Yami Yami, the fruit of darkness, and the Gura Gura, the earthquake fruit that Whitebeard had. With darkness, he can nullify other abilities and absorb anything, and with earthquakes, he can destroy islands. Combined, they turn him into an unprecedented machine of destruction. We still do not know how it is possible for his body to tolerate the 2 fruits. Some suggest it is due to Teach's peculiar constitution, others that he has multiple souls, or perhaps because of the lineage of the Davy clan, but the fact is, he achieves something that theoretically should kill anyone. This makes him unique and extremely dangerous, and who knows if he plans to obtain a 3rd fruit. It has been speculated that he is looking for a mythical Zoan type like Kraken or something like that to complete his set of powers. In fact, that same Kraken theory has been on the channel for years, and now with the whole Davy Jones theme, it gains a lot of strength. Then he also has the face of Saturn, and this point is more subtle, but it could be critical. During the Egghead incident, 2 of Teach's commanders, Katarina Devon and Van Augur, infiltrated Egghead and ended up encountering Sanjay Garcia Saturn, one of the 5 elders who went there. Saturn, surprised, demanded to know what they were doing, as the crew was doing some rather strange things, and Katarina Devon and Van Augur responded that their goal was the world. Yes, they use those words, and you will understand later, but the most important thing is that Teach's pirates saw Saturno, and even Katarina Devon managed to touch him, and her 9-tailed fox fruit is capable of copying anyone's appearance. It is evident that Katarina Devon can now take on Saturno's appearance thanks to her ability. This could allow Teach's crew to impersonate an elder of the world government at some point, deceiving the government from within. And I know more than one of you will think that this character is dead and therefore has no further role, but precisely because they are dead, it can be more surprising, as let's remember that no one knows about this. No one in the world government knows that Katarina Devon has Saturn's face, so she could act at any moment, could appear as if he were alive, surprise everyone, and cause a few seconds of doubt that might allow for a very interesting victory for Teach, or even even deceive people into thinking he is still alive. Seeing this brief review, it is clear that Teach has accumulated too many important things for Oda to leave him forgotten or in a secondary role. If we think about it coldly, he has everything to be the final villain of the work. Power, influence, information, personal motivations against Luffy. So why does he go relatively unnoticed in the recent narrative? Precisely because Oda wants to divert attention. He has kept us entertained with Imu, with the mysteries of the Void Century, with Shanks making moves, the threat of the government, and meanwhile Teach was making his move almost without the spotlight. In the recent arcs, since the revelation in Mary Jawaaz, the importance of Imu has been rising, occupying the center of theories and discussions. Meanwhile, Teach has been moving in the shadows, doing incredible things, but not standing out too much on the pages. We know he's there, but we don't pay much attention to him. Everything is practically telling us, hey, look here, here's Imu, the villain in the shadows. And meanwhile, with the other hand, he hides Teach under the table, accumulating trump cards. With all the above, we already have enough reasons to at least doubt whether everything we see is real or just a carefully constructed illusion by the author. But there's more. Now let's go with the big clues that Oda has left. Very subtly, it must be said, but he has done it to prepare this twist. The biggest clue Oda has left us about this whole master plan is the recent flashback of God Valley, narrated during the Elbaf arc through the memories of Prince Lucky and Scopper Gaban. In this flashback, we were finally introduced to the legendary pirate Rox D. Xebec, a mythical figure who had been mentioned before but never shown. Interestingly, the revelation of Rox as a character happened almost in parallel to that of Imu in the manga. Both were introduced around the same chapters, almost as if Oda was giving us two pieces of the puzzle at once to later connect them. The impressive thing is how it was presented to us. To Rox D. Xebec. In literally the first panel where his face appears, the manga makes it very clear who the father of, in this case, Davy D. Teach, or as we knew him, Marshall D. Teach. Just like that, we are shown Rox with an unmistakable appearance, which is Teach's face, but with normal teeth, the same bulky physique, the same features, and at the bottom of the page, it directly states that Rox had a son named Marshall D. Teach, indicating that he is Blackbeard's father. The connection is immediate and too obvious, and this is very unusual. Normally, when Oda makes revelations about important family ties, like this character is the father of that one, he does it in a much more dramatic way through revealing dialogues or surprise revelations at critical moments or more naturally in the work. But here he does it almost casually. The first thing we learn about Rox is that he is Blackbeard's father. Why would Oda be in such a hurry to connect Xebec with Teach? Why put it in the first panel? Clearly he wants to plant that idea in our heads right away. He leaves no room for theories or ambiguity. Blackbeard is Xebec's son, period. This, of course, establishes a very powerful generational parallel. But let's continue with the flashback. We see that Rox D. Xebec was an extremely ambitious pirate whose declared dream was to become the king of the world, above the king of the pirates. To achieve this, 44 years ago, he organized the strongest crew of the time, the Rox Pirates, and set out to challenge the world government. What did Xebec do at his peak? Nothing more and nothing less than infiltrating Mary Jawaaz, the holy city, and sneaking into the Chamber of Flowers where Imu resides. This is an incredible feat. Rox achieved something no one else had managed, reaching Imu in person all by himself. In that crucial scene, Rox stands before Imu in the room of the empty throne. And what happens? Rox had kidnapped some kings attending the reverie to use them as hostages, but Imu is unfazed by that. Imu appears before him in the shadows, and Xebec quickly realizes that he can't defeat him at that moment. Why? Because he is very strong? No, for something very specific. He had a power of regeneration or immortality that made him untouchable. And indeed, if it had been purely about strength, one might think that Imu himself could have finished off Xebec there, but he did not. In fact, he didn't even try. Since Imu's identity must be protected, and notice the level of fear Imu has of being revealed to the world, he ended Cobra's life immediately, only appearing before Cobra because he knew he was going to kill him. And then when he realized Sabo had seen him, he attacked without hesitation. So Rox, admitting he can't defeat him, throws a promise. I will return. I may not be able to defeat you right now, but one day I will return. Imu at that moment lets him go and ignores him, and Xebec flees, knowing that it is not yet the time. This scene is deliberately set by Oda as a seed for the future. Rox basically vowed to return to defeat Imu at the right time, but we know that never happened in his era, because shortly after the God Valley incident took place, where Rox ultimately died or disappeared. And because of this, he was never able to fulfill that promise to return for Imu. Now, if the promise is still up in the air and Oda took the trouble to show it to us, how could it be fulfilled? Well, the answer is clear, through the person who inherited his will. And his genes, that is, through his son, Davy D. Teach, Blackbeard. And Blackbeard is literally the heir of Xebec in blood and spirit, so he is the perfect candidate to return to that Chamber of Flowers and settle that unfinished business. Imagine the future scene, Teach arriving at Mary Jouai's, entering the Pangaea Palace, where Imu is, perhaps sitting on the empty throne, and that would be a spectacular parallel that would close that 40-year circle. But there are more clues in this flashback. We know that Rox had a bold plan to rise to the top of the world. His goal was to defeat Imu and the world government and usurp their place. To achieve this, he sought powerful allies and resources. In particular, the flashback shows that Rox was obsessed with uniting the giants of Elbaf to his cause, as he considered that the strength of Elbaf was key to overthrowing the Holy Land. He repeatedly tried to recruit King Harold of Elbaf, even offering him all kinds of alliances. And here it is important that Rox mentions that to fulfill his plan, he needs the King of Elbaf at that time, who was Harold, to consume a certain fruit that was very powerful and which we imagine would be a legendary fruit. And indeed, Rox planned for the strongest giant of all, with the leadership of Elbaf, to eat a powerful fruit to use him as a weapon against Imu. We see that Rox ended up fighting against Harold when he allied with the government, as they offered Harold a deal to kill Xebec. Rox got angry with Harold for allowing himself to be a puppet of the government and broke his friendship with him, but he refused to kill him because deep down he respected him too much. This shows how important the giants were in Xebec's plan. The flashback continues 38 years ago. God Valley. Rox assaults the island to rescue his family, his wife Eris, and little Teach, who had been captured there for the Tenryubitos hunting game. We see Rox fighting against the Celestial Guards, the Knights of God, and against his own allies turned into demons by some government power. And amidst all the chaos that unfolds, we have to return for a moment to Harold and remember that just when he is with Harold, the true surname of Xebec is revealed to us. It is revealed that his real name is Davy D. Xebec, showing us a new clan and giving it incredible importance. From Xebec himself, it is mentioned that he doesn't know much about his clan, but he does know that they are descendants of Davy Jones. By the way, let's remember that when he saw Imu, he told him that he was a big fan of Davy Jones, as if giving him a hint and let's say standing up to him. And he also mentioned something very interesting, and that is when he mentions that his wife and son are in God Valley, that he left them there. He told Teach a very important phrase and said, "Trust in the Davy clan." This obviously is there for a reason, but this whole flashback is not just there to tell us ancient history, it's there to make us understand Teach's motivations in the present. Xebec was introduced now, so late in the series, because his legacy is extremely important for the end. Thanks to this retrospective, we know why Teach wants to rise to the top of the world, and where he got so many ideas, information, and that ambition. Xebec's will, which was to overthrow the world or Imu, passed on to Teach even his knowledge. It is revealed that before the final battle, Rox told Harold his real name, his lineage, and his motivations. This implies that Teach, as a family member of Rox, perhaps knew the deepest secrets of his father and the Davy plan. It is worth noting that Teach named his flagship the Saber of Xebec, in clear tribute to Xebec, and took Hachinosu because it was his father's former domain. In other words, Teach is deliberately following in Xebec's footsteps. Oda also showed us how Xebec failed, and why Teach should not or cannot fail where his father did. Before parting, Rox told his family a very important phrase: "Trust in the Davy clan." That line is intriguing. What exactly did he mean? Perhaps the Davy clan, which we remember are apparently descendants of Davy Jones, has some special destiny or hidden ability, maybe the capacity to wield multiple devil fruits, which would explain Teach. Or it was simply a way of saying, trust in our family or our will. I don't know, but in any case, Oda gave that phrase a special connotation, highlighting it. We also know that the high-ranking government officials, the God Knights, and Imu had their eyes on the Davy clan as something important. As natural enemies, in fact, it is emphasized that the Tenryu Bito in God Valley were enraged to see before them a lineage they considered an ancient enemy and wanted to exterminate them immediately. This sounds very similar to what we already knew about the legacy of the D. That phrase from Rocinante, where he says that all the D are natural enemies of the gods, with the gods being the world nobles. All these pieces paint a very interesting picture, and teaches an enemy in capital letters of Imu, much more than Luffy is currently, despite prophecies, symbolism, Nika, Joy Boy, and all that. Personally, even in the manga, he has not yet crossed paths with Imu nor caused that direct hatred. Instead, Teach carries the inherited enmity from his father against Imu. Imu, who already defeated Joy Boy, Luffy's ideological predecessor in the past. It's true, but narratively Oda is positioning Teach as the one who has more substantial reasons to oppose Imu in the present. Now let's move from Imu's side to Luffy's side. Let's think, who fits better as Luffy's final enemy in terms of the story? On one hand, Imu represents the antithesis of Luffy's freedom. He is the hidden global tyrant, but Luffy's story since the East Blue has not been a direct struggle against the world government itself. That has been more the role of Dragon and the revolutionaries. Luffy has mainly been a pirate facing other rival pirates in search of adventures in the One Piece. His dream is not to overthrow the government, it is to be free and be the king of the pirates. And who is Luffy's biggest rival in the pirate race? Blackbeard. Since Jaya, Teach has been Luffy's parallel nemesis. Both are bearers of the D. Both aspire to find the One Piece. Both believe in the dreams of pirates. Let's remember that phrase from Teach. Men's dreams never die. Teach is in many ways the dark reflection of Luffy. Where Luffy makes allies and trusts his enemies, Teach manipulates and betrays. He betrayed Blackbeard's crew, betrayed Whitebeard's crew, handed over Ace, etc. Where Luffy fights head-on, Teach ambushes from behind. However, both share that relentless determination. Teach has caused enormous personal harm to Luffy. He already provoked Ace's capture and, consequently, his death. Now he has captured Garp, Luffy's beloved grandfather, and it is very possible that he will soon do something with Shanks. There are many solid theories that Teach might end up killing Shanks. Yes, Shanks, Luffy's mentor, inspiration, and friend. He has unfinished business with Blackbeard, as Shanks has the scar on his eye made by Teach and already warned that Teach was the real threat. Let's imagine that Teach manages to defeat or even kill Shanks. That would ignite a fierce emotional motivation in Luffy to confront him. Too many factors point to an inevitable clash. Monkey D. Luffy against Davy or Marshall D. Teach, the king of the pirates against who would be after defeating Imu, the king of the world. Because even though we have the world government as the cause of many evils in One Piece, after all, the story began as a series about pirates and it is likely to end as it started, being a story about pirates with a final confrontation between the two most powerful pirates of the era. One that would be Luffy, representing the inherited will of the ancient kingdom of Joy Boy, allied with all the oppressed peoples of the world. The other, Teach, wielding the dark power of the world government, having virtually crowned himself as the sovereign of the world after overthrowing Imu or using their weapons. It will be the cyclical repetition of the war from 800 years ago, which in that case was the D against Imu, but this time it is D against D, since Teach is also a D. All this for the fate of the world. Oda has already promised us a war so big that it will make Marineford look like child's play. We can foresee that this final war will have multiple fronts. The revolutionaries against the government, the Straw Hats, and their allies against the combined forces of Teach. It will be total chaos. Old enemies becoming Luffy's allies, betrayals, ancient weapons. In short, madness. And do you know the most curious thing of all? That all this downfall on Imu's part would be his own fault, because the only person who could warn Imu of what was coming was Saturn. Since if we remember in God Valley, when Rock sees Imu, he tells Whitebeard that what they have before their eyes is basically the world. The same words used by Katarina Devon and Van Augur to Saturn when they ask him what his goal is, saying it is the world. And at that moment, Saturn immediately attacked Katarina Devon and Van Augur. Perhaps that went a bit unnoticed, but seeing that Saturn is the person whom Imu possesses when they are in God Valley, it's because Saturn already heard those words from the person he knows is Teach's father, as he himself mentions having a special lineage. In other words, in summary, Saturn understood those words as if Rox was returning and knew that this time he was coming directly for Imu. But Imu, in an act of selfishness and lack of foresight, ended Saturno's life before he could explain everything he had seen and what was coming. In other words, he ended the life of the only person who could give him the information that he needed to prepare for what was coming. But in the midst of that whirlwind, Luffy and Teach were destined to face each other one last time. Both would have what the other desires. Perhaps Teach will manage to obtain the One Piece or part of its secret, proclaiming himself king of the world after having toppled Mary Joyce. And Luffy would have the will of the world behind him, becoming the emblem of the new era. It would literally be the Battle of the Dawn. Each would have a special power, as Luffy by that time might be known as the King of the Pirates, and Teach at that moment is known as the King of the World, leading to the confrontation of the King of the World against the King of the Pirates, the man who controls the whole world with the man who wants to give freedom to the whole world. It would literally be the Battle of the Dawn. Why the dawn? Because in One Piece it has been repeated many times that the world will see a new dawn when oppression ends. The Minks, Oden, Pedro all spoke of that dawn of the world. Luffy, carrying the legacy of Joy Boy and Nika, is destined to bring the dawn. And what more literal image of that dawn than defeating Teach, whose power is absolute darkness. Teach's darkness against Luffy's son, Nika, the sun god. Drawing a small parallel with the fight between Blackbeard and Jace, in which in the last blow we saw, Teach mentions who will win, the sun or the darkness. This symbolism is too good to waste. Luffy is that rising sun and Teach is the shadow that eclipses it. Thus, One Piece would culminate as what it has always been, a pirate adventure, a story of pirates, with the ultimate battle between the future king of the pirates and his nemesis. In the process, of course, Luffy would have made many allies, and they would also fight, but the final obstacle would be a pirate, not a celestial king. It makes a lot of narrative sense. Oda can resolve the political plot and also give us an epic pirate duel to close the story with a flourish. Imagine that final scene after the victory. Luffy finally achieving the title of King of the Pirates, defeating Teach, freeing the world from an era of darkness, while a beautiful dawn appears on the horizon, the freed slaves, the oppressed people celebrating, Luffy's Nakamas laughing with tears. That's the ending all One Piece fans want to see, and Oda, master of storytelling, would present it to us after years of believing the final villain was someone else. An unforgettable surprise. In conclusion, Imu will not be the final villain, Blackbeard will be. Imu would have served as a catalyst for the Great War and as a false pinnacle, only for Teach to seize the opportunity, take control, and reveal himself as Luffy's true ultimate rival, ending Imu's life. Eiichiro Oda has set an elaborate trap for us, constructing an incredible smokescreen before our eyes with Imu and the entire world government plot, all while preparing the structure for a grand plot twist related to Blackbeard and Xebeck's legacy. All the breadcrumbs are there in the manga, dates, numbers, phrases, events, all waiting for us to connect them. And we are heading towards an epic finale where Monkey D. Luffy will illuminate the new dawn of the world, defeating David D. Teach, and finally ending the cycle of oppression that began 800 years ago. Get ready because the best of One Piece is yet to come, and many may not have seen it coming. The inherited will always find a way to be fulfilled, and the dream of the D will soon clash against the darkness of Blackbeard in a battle for the ages. The dawn awaits us after the darkest night, and let the battle continue, because the dreams of men never end. And this would be the entire theory, all the information, and everything I have to tell you about this famous and anticipated final war, about who will be the final villain of One Piece, why it won't be Imu, and why it will be Teach. I think I have been able to explain and divide each of the points I have seen around the manga, being quite specific and concise in many of them, trying to explain it in the simplest way so that it is easily understood, so that everyone who has watched the video and reached this point understands exactly what I mean. Because in the comments I want you to leave not only what you thought of the video, which I would like you to leave in the comments as always, but above all your opinion. If you have changed your mind, if you haven't changed your mind, also tell me why. If you agreed with my opinion, then leave it in the comments as well, and I want you to give me everything you think right now, having just seen the theory in the comments, because I love reading different opinions. Also, if you see someone with an interesting opinion, comment to that person and debate with each other in the comments, because you know I love reading the debates you have, as I must also say that you are quite respectful, which I appreciate. And by the way, if you think that the final villain of One Piece is not going to be either of these two, let me know in the comments as well, because I'm interested in knowing what that third option is. And I imagine that in a few years, probably quite a few, this video will gain or lose a lot of credibility, since it will either have come true or not, honestly. I think in a few years, this video will be funny, for better or worse. Let's hope for the best and that it ages very, very well and doesn't age like Saturn, who ended up very badly. So just to tell you that if you liked the video, you know you can leave a big like. As always, subscribe to the channel to see more videos.